Number 10, Squirrel Girl versus Dr. Doom. When Squirrel Girl was new on the scene, she was still weirdly proving how OP of a character she was. Although any fight involving Squirrel Girl you would think would be super unfair in terms of her being completely outmatched. And you'd be right about these fights being unfair, but it's usually more often the other way around, with many of her opponents standing no chance against her. One of her first fights happened to go just like that, featuring the brilliant and dangerous Dr. Doom, who found himself quickly trounced by Squirrel Girl when she attacked him with squirrels, leaving him to be pretty much embarrassed about this fight forever onward. Number 9, Captain America versus the Punisher. This was a very one-sided fight, not only on paper, but also just in terms of how this all went down. Two villains, Goldbug and Plunderer, were willing to join Captain America's side of the fight in Civil War, revealing that even the supervillain community was concerned about what would happen if Iron Man won. They might be villains, but they were people too, and were terrified at the prospect of the nation becoming a police state. Punisher didn't like the idea of working with villains though, and shot down their offer by literally gunning them down. This resulted in a pissed off Cap beginning a brutal fight with Frank, who refused to fight back because, well, Captain America was one of the good guys? So based on how this fight shook out, I don't know if you'd actually be able to tell. Captain America beats the Punisher within an inch of his life over the course of a handful of panels, and also calls him a murderous piece of trash. Wow, that is pretty brutal, Cap. Alright friends, before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. It really does help us out here at the channel. Number 8, the Punisher versus Daken. In this fight, Punisher once again is brutally defeated by his opponent, though this time a lot more permanently. Punisher ends up being no match for Daken, who makes quick work of him despite all his guns. I mean, we already knew this was how it was going to end, didn't we? Considering Daken takes after his dad, Logan, and has a pretty intense healing factor. The real impressive thing though is just how much of a beating and stabbing Frank withstands before Daken inevitably takes the victory. In the end, Daken decapitates Frank Castle, killing him, though Frank of course would later come back as the monster Frankencastle and then later be returned to his old self once again. Number 7, Black Canary versus Superman. Pretty much any Injustice fight against Superman is brutal because of how powerful Superman is known for being, and of course how crazed and evil he is here. Black Canary attempts to take down the big bad Superman in Injustice, and at least she came armed with a gun and a kryptonite bullet to do so. Still, this fight ends how you'd expect it to, with Black Canary being no match for the Man of Steel. Well, almost anyways. She successfully shoots him, taking him out momentarily, but he is then chosen as a Yellow Lantern because of his immense ability to instill fear in others, which honestly I agree. Although she may be taken out by Superman's heat vision right after that with a shot straight to the gut, she does still end up getting a different kind of victory through her defeat. A consolation prize at least. She's wearing contacts that have the ability to record everything she sees, allowing people to see just how much of a brutal tyrant Superman has become, because they broadcast it everywhere. Also, I feel like if you actually put in contacts that had cameras in them, even in the future, even if like the technology was amazing, they still have to be pretty thick. Like, I have a hard enough trouble putting regular contacts in my eyes on days when I have to do that. Number 6, Hawkgirl versus Barbastos. Granted, this was Nth Metal Enhanced Hawkgirl, but still, if you had told me this was how Dark Knight's metal was going to go down, I wouldn't have believed you. In the end, Hawkgirl was the one to defeat Barbastos in the comic. Though of course, that wouldn't be completely where that story would end, as we saw with the continuation in Dark Knight's Death Metal. However brief the fight between Hawkgirl and the Bat God was, it was still pretty cool that she was the one who ended up taking him down. Even if it was only because of, well, the Element X blade that she was really able to do this. Barbados is basically a god, so on paper this fight in general just sounds pretty crazy. Number 5, The Punisher versus Wolverine, and Spider-Man, and Daredevil. Now you might expect you know how this one should go, but let's also remember that this is Garth Ennis writing Punisher, so yeah. It doesn't really go down the way you'd think. Instead, the Punisher manipulates the three heroes briefly into turning against one another when they seek to bring him in. These three are hoping to team up to essentially eventually arrest Punisher and then turn him over to the courts and, you know, get him convicted with like the law and all of that stuff, even though Wolverine needs a bit of convincing when it comes to this approach at the beginning. Punisher takes out all three of these heroes, even managing to disable Spider-Man by convincing him that if he moves, bombs will go off. You'd think Spider-Man would actually be able to sense whether or not this was true, but I digress. I guess his Spidey sense wasn't working that well that day. Number 4, Superman versus Batman. I mean, you'd think you know how this one should shake out, considering Batman is just a normal human with a bunch of money and, well, years of training. However, in Dark Knight Returns, we get to be pleasantly surprised. A normal man, even when as skilled as Bruce Wayne, you'd think would just be no match for Superman, especially as, well, he's getting on in years here, whereas Kal-El, while also being older, barely looks or seems to have aged at all. But Batman uses all of his strategic skills, knowledge, and his gadgets to help him win this fight. And man, does it go to show that you should never dismiss Batman just because he doesn't have conventional superpowers. Or superpowers at all. Batman has the best superpower, the superpower to know a ton about heroes because he does his homework. Number 3, The Punisher versus Sentry. During Dark Reign, Punisher refuses to stand by and let Norman Osborn become the world's new, biggest, and brightest hero as S.H.I.E.L.D. is disbanded and Osborn becomes the head of its replacement organization, Hammer, and the new Dark Avengers team. Punisher aims to eliminate Norman Osborn, but standing in his way is the Sentry, who stops the Punisher's bullet mid-air as it soars towards Osborn's head. Sentry sets his sights on Frank, and, well, I think you can imagine how this one goes. Still, at least this fight is gratifying in the sense that it isn't over with like a 1-2 punch. Instead, we actually watch as the Punisher tries everything he can to try to defeat Sentry, knowing it's pretty much all hopeless, but refusing to give up. And he does all this while being brutalized by Robert, who initially just wants to talk it out and arrest Punisher without a fuss. So that's how Punisher is actually able to survive, because Sentry just wants to talk. Punisher's skills and weapons aren't what save him actually at the end of the day. He simply manages to get lucky when Robert doesn't call out his get out of jail attempt at bluffing. Thank goodness. Number 2, Superman versus Alfred Pennyworth. You would think you already know how this fight would shake out, but hey, it didn't go down quite the way most of us would expect when it happened in Injustice. After Superman broke Batman's back with the good old Bane snap over the knee move, he had a brief moment of regret as Batman called him out for being more monster than hero, for torturing him, all while claiming it was for the greater good. As Superman considers what he's just done, he turns to Alfred, who has approached him. However, Alfred didn't approach Superman to, you know, communicate any words of wisdom here or to help Clark come back around and like regain his senses and see the error of his ways. He came to teach Superman a lesson about attacking Bruce. Alfred used a pill which temporarily granted him the same level of strength as Superman, making this super uneven fight on paper a lot more even in reality. Using the element of surprise, Alfred was then able to beat Superman to a pulp while confessing that he was very disappointed at him before scooping up Bruce and taking him to safety. Reminding everyone that even when it comes to facing powerful foes like Superman, Alfred is still and will always be a badass. In case people forgot. Number 1, Squirrel Girl versus Galactus. I freaking love this fight, and I love that I started this list with Squirrel Girl and I'm ending it with her, even though this fight is super ridiculous. You wouldn't think someone like Squirrel Girl, whose powers include communicating with and controlling squirrels and sharp teeth, would be able to take on and even defeat the epic force of Galactus, who is nigh unstoppable and comes armed with the Power Cosmic, which basically allows you to do, well, whatever writers need whoever wields it to do. Power Cosmic, by the way, turns out does help Galactus to communicate in the vacuum of space as well. In the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl issue 4, Squirrel Girl defeats Galactus by realizing that the only way to defeat him is by offering him an alternate planet to devour other than Earth. She and Tippy Toe manage to access the databases in his ship's computers and find one that is covered in nuts, which they manage to convince Galactus are delicious and nutritious, full of calories, life energy. life energy. As strange as this all sounds, the whole issue is pretty great when it comes to writing, so as weird as it sounds that Squirrel Girl was able to beat Galactus, it actually really makes sense in this context.
Coming in at number 10, Superman vs. the Puzzler. There's no doubt that Superman has faced his fair share of hard-fought battles. You know, villains who actually make him work up a sweat at least, and ones that force him to use some of his more stronger powers. However, when the matchup is so unfair, Superman barely has to even try, and on top of that, he did use some of his lamer powers to defeat the Puzzler. The Puzzler that Superman faced here was the female version named Valerie Van Hopten. For years, she had admired Superman, even wanting to become a hero just like him. However, when she was unable to realize this dream, she turned to a life of crime and was eventually hired to kill the man that she once adored. Valerie has this unique ability to break her body down into puzzle pieces, but remember though, unique doesn't always mean powerful. Sure enough, when these two squared off, Superman just straight up tore her to shreds. I mean, that is her power, but if you're going to break into a billion little pieces, you better make sure that your opponent can't punch people into space. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this point, Superman doesn't even really have to try here. He relies on his lamest power, which is super breath. I mean, come on. If you have a lamer power that Superman has, leave me a comment down below. But just like that, the Puzzler is rendered useless from this breath. A cold breath. And then perhaps what's even more humiliating is that on her second time around, she ended up in a trash can. Yeah, very unfair. Coming in at number 9, Captain Boomerang vs. the Flash. This is another one of those fights where you see the villains psyching themselves up for a few pages, but you know that they have absolutely no chance. The Flash, in my opinion, gets overlooked far too often, probably because he isn't exactly a physically intimidating hero, and most of the time the heroes that can punch the hardest usually dominate the fight. But the Flash has superhuman speed, so he could technically kill his enemy before they even have a chance to introduce themselves. That's the delicate balance with the writing in a Flash comic book, and why it's a little bit different from the other ones. They have to walk this fine line between enemies that have the brain of a goldfish and a hero that seems to never remember his strongest power when a fight comes his way. But even so, this fight between Captain Boomerang and the Flash is so ridiculously one-sided. The Flash can outrun bullets, but old Boomerang here, who looks more like a lunch lady, actually thought that he could beat the Flash with a slower projectile that was designed to be returned to him. Then if that wasn't dumb enough, he straps explosives to said boomerangs. Seems like a flawless plan. Would somebody get this guy a Boomerang for Dummies handbook though, because he's gonna blow himself up. Coming in at number 8, Batman vs. Calendar Man. I'm sure that just by hearing the title of this point, you already know how this one's going to go. I'm sorry, but a guy who commits crimes related to the date is just one of the weirdest supervillains, and not very smart considering the fact that Batman is a master detective. What's worse about this villain is that he's literally wearing a costume designed to correlate with the date of the crime that he committed, making it even easier to spot him. Due to this, he has become notoriously known as a joke to both heroes and other villains even. This matchup is so unfair that Batman would probably be better off just letting the Gotham Police Department arrest him on their own. Calendar Man is a successful inventor that is capable of designing machinery required for his various schemes, but put that against billionaire Bruce Wayne and there is no question that Batman is going to come out on top every single time. Coming in at number 7, Thunder Punch vs. the Transformers. Now, remember when I said that most superheroes are just people that punch really hard? Well, sometimes that isn't enough to cut it. And in the case of Thunder Punch, we feel even worse because his punches would probably be better suited for, I don't know, someone his own size. You see, Thunder Punch was one of the Neo Knights, this super team that was hell-bent on destroying the Transformers. Although, they didn't even try to design any new technology to do this. They just thought punching people really hard would be sufficient. I mean, it's worked out for other people, but not this case. Turns out when your opponent is a 4-story tall robot that can turn into a tank, punching him is just not gonna do the trick. The strangest part about Thunder Punch is the lack of logic when facing an enemy this big. The Transformers could step on him and not even notice. What's worse is the design of his costume, which completely exposes his hands. His body is coated in metal and hard fabric, but he chose to not cover up the one thing that he was hitting a robot with. Real smart. Coming in at number 6, Wolverine vs. Magneto. Now this one here is deceiving because Wolverine has held his own against some really tough supervillains, but Magneto is, well, Magneto. During the 90s event called Fatal Attractions though, the X-Men were forced to attack Magneto's new asteroid base. Once there, an intense fight takes place where Professor X and Jean are telepathically attacking Magneto while Wolverine wounds him on the physical plane. This ultimately ultimately made Magneto really angry, and what followed was perhaps one of the most horrific comic book panels in X-Men history. Because Wolverine's skeleton is made of adamantium, Magneto could manipulate this just enough to rip the metal out of his body. This left Wolverine completely incapacitated and now with large spikes of metal sticking out of his body. His only savior was the fact that Professor X was able to wipe Magneto's memory before he could finish the job. In at number 5, Daredevil versus the Fantastic Four. Now we must give credit where credit is due. Daredevil certainly put up a valiant effort, but ultimately this was a 4-on-1 bout. The Fantastic Four are among the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, and Daredevil is a blind lawyer. Well, he can also do karate, but he has to be extra crafty when it comes to planning his attacks. In the 1968 comic book The Flames of Battle, Daredevil decided to attack the Four Freedoms Plaza, and I gotta say, he was pretty successful. I mean, he somehow fooled the Human Torch into knocking over a water tower, and then he was able to get Mr. Fantastic to attack the thing by accident. Originally, when Jack Kirby had drawn Daredevil just beating the crap out of the thing, Stan Lee had to step in and say that it made absolutely no sense, which is why we saw Lee writing in a part of the story that sees Daredevil getting Reed Richards to accidentally hit the thing with a nerve blast ray. Although the humor and how weak the Daredevil character is in comparison still resides in those thought bubbles. Right after the thing is blasted, Daredevil stands back and thinks to himself, it wasn't my kick that stopped him. Probably not the best idea to be a superhero with low self-esteem, but there it is. Coming in at number 4, Batman vs. Guy Gardner. Next up, we have the master billionaire detective again against the Green Lantern Guy Gardner. Gardner is wielding one of the most powerful weapons in the universe, but in 1987, this was somehow no match for Batman's money, punches, and cool technology. During the Justice League International number 5, Guy Gardner's lips were flapping as per usual, and so his big mouth got a big punch from Batman. In theory, Gardner should be more than capable of taking out Batman, but due to his extreme arrogance, he removed his power ring right before taking a swing at the Dark Knight. The removal of his ring automatically makes this an unfair fight for Guy Gardner, and in comparison to the big villains Batman has taken down, he makes quick work of Guy in this fight. Coming in at number 3, Star Fox versus the Incredible Hulk. During the Incredible Hulk number 300, Bruce Banner is hulking out as per usual, except in doing so, he begins to completely demolish New York City. Now the Hulk is required to be doing this, and yet despite him laying down his big green punches, most of the Marvel squad seems pretty concerned. Now if any fellow hero was deserving of a beatdown for trying to stop the Hulk, it's Star Fox. And I have a feeling the rest of the Avengers would agree because he's notoriously one of the creepiest comic book characters of all time. Star Fox decides that the way he's going to soothe the Hulk is by using his special ability to emit waves of erotic pleasure. Now I don't claim to be a genius, but I'm fairly certain you can't take down the Hulk with waves of pleasure. Even if you could, how do you expect that to end gracefully? Thankfully, the Hulk was able to knock some sense into Star Fox and hit him with one of the hardest punches he's probably ever felt in his life. It was an extremely one-sided interaction that definitely made Star Fox rethink his approach. Coming in number 2, Dazzler versus Dr. Doom. This one is just sad. Not only does Dazzler lose this fight, but she does so in her own comic book. We're not sure what the writers were thinking when they made Dazzler because her powers are definitely not what one would expect to see from a superhero. Dazzler rocks a shiny outfit with a deep neckline and can convert sound into light, plus she wears roller skates. Well, she can skate really fast. I mean, it seems more like the resume of a DJ, but okay. Somehow the writers find a way to make sense of this hero attacking Dr. Doom, and her big plan is even more sad to watch play out. You see, Dazzler's dazzling plan to kill one of the most powerful supervillains of all time was to just skate at him really fast. That's like an astronaut saying, in order to reach the moon, I will now be climbing the world's largest ladder. Dazzler tries to hit him with her light show after this, but Dr. Doom just ultimately ends up electrocuting the entire room and capturing her until the Fantastic Four can arrive to save her. Coming in at number 1, Spider-Man versus the Sinister Six. Spider-Man is a kid with superpowers that has to experience puberty and bullying all at the same time, so there's no question that he's well versed when it comes to adversity, and supervillains are constantly adding to this pressure for him to remain on his toes at all times. However, even the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man can become overwhelmed from time to time. For example, when Dr. Octopus got the Sinister Six back together, they were fresh out of prison and had a lineup that featured the Hobgoblin and a new Sandman. Safe to say that if it weren't for Doc Ock's own ego and Spidey's superpowered friends, his days could have easily been numbered by the Sinister Six.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Wolverine vs. Hulk. This one is wild, okay? We all know Wolverine is ripped, and he gets really ripped in this one. And I don't mean ripped like jacked either, I mean ripped like in half. This one comes from Wolverine vs. Hulk, and it's more than brutal. So in this story, Wolverine is sent to Tibet to assassinate the Hulk. The problem is, he's the Incredible Hulk, so it may sound easier than it looks. So when the battle between these two started up, it's loud, it's messy, and it's going to be pretty violent. Hulk picked Wolverine up and literally broke him into two, tossing his lower half up a mountain and leaving Wolverine's torso bleeding in the snow down below. Just another day in the Ultimates, you know? Being the world's greatest tracker and all, Wolverine smelt his legs that were a few miles up the mountain and then did a really slow, really painful climb to get those smelly feet back where they belong. The series was actually delayed in real life, so this journey up the mountain to get his legs back took 3 years for readers to finally see. Imagine if you had to wait that long to see the next episode after like a Breaking Bad finale or something. 3 years? That's insane. I couldn't do it. And before we head over to number 9, guys, if you wanted to go ahead and give us a thumbs up for this video, that would be great. It helps out the studio a lot. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's dive back into this list. Number 9, Batman vs. Bane. Directed by, of course, Christopher Nolan, who had done the previous installments, comes a pretty epic conclusion to the Dark Knight trilogy. Released in 2012, The Dark Knight Rises, as you can guess from the title alone, is about Batman rising up. From where? Why? What's going on? Well, how about a broken back thanks to Bane? So this is 8 years after the Joker had a run-in with Gotham City. So now Batman has returned to take down Tom Hardy as he mumbles and frowns aggressively in this film. We get one of my favorite fight scenes from any superhero movie. And what I love about this scene so much is that there's no music to it at all. All you hear is Batman legitimately struggling to try and fight this dude. And it makes it more realistic. It's stressful, and you can see Bruce become more and more exhausted by each punch. And it all comes to a screeching halt when Bane picks up Bruce for one last blow, right to the spinal cord.
Spirit! Oh, your buddy!
Now, I know people like to give this movie a hard time, but seeing Batman get his ass kicked like this reminds me that it's not always the hero that gets the last punch. Number 8, Magneto vs. Wolverine. Look, I'll be honest, I'm a nail biter, okay? And there's days where I can't even muster up the strength to pull a hangnail out of my own finger or whatever. It sucks. I can't deal with pain, especially when something's coming out of my body, which makes the next one on this list really brutal for me to read. Now, I couldn't imagine if all my bones were suddenly ripped out of my body. That's a nightmare. And that's exactly what happens to Wolverine when Magneto has had enough of his nonsense. Yeah, this all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event. So Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outwards like water bursting through a dam. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I couldn't tell you what is. Definitely not one of my hangnails. This one is probably a little bit more painful. Thankfully, Xavier wiped Magneto's memory of the whole event, and Wolverine was out of commission for a while recovering. I mean, he had mental spikes sticking out of his body. I don't think he's gonna get any chores done in the meantime. Number 7, The Avengers vs. Thanos. The Russo brothers came in the MCU with the Winter Soldier, and we got that sick, awesome elevator scene, and then we got Civil War. They make some pretty fun movies. My personal favorite of the bunch is still Infinity War. I mean, all these characters who led their own franchise crammed into one single movie shouldn't have worked out as well as it did. It's a smooth flick. So we see Thanos as he walks his way through the universe collecting the cosmic Infinity Stones. First, he decimates Xandar for the Power Stone, gave Loki the old 1-2 choke for the Space Stone, and then he punched the Hulk so hard in the neck that he quit being the Hulk. And this is like the first 10 minutes of the movie. So the movie itself is a brutal fight, but of course it comes down to the last stone, the last attempt. The Mind Stone. The stone that is Vision. It's in his forehead. So after a last effort attempt of removing the stone in Wakanda, Wanda Maximoff is forced to destroy it. So while she's working on that, all of our Avengers are getting destroyed by the powers that Thanos now obtains, but they don't come out on top in this one. Vision gets that big yellow blackhead pulled right out of his forehead, and then the theater sat silent, and we just watched Vision's lifeless and colorless body fall to the ground. Seeing the Avengers lose like this, especially Vision, was definitely one of the more brutal beatdowns in an MCU movie. Number 6, Squirrel Girl and Dr. Doom. So Squirrel Girl has beaten some big bads in the Marvel Universe before. She's taken down MODOK, Mandarin, and at one point Thanos. It's becoming a running joke by now, but one defeat that always shocks me is when a bunch of squirrels took down Victor Von Doom. Just a bunch of squirrels. Yeah, it happened back in the 90s in Marvel Superheroes issue 8. So she bumps into Iron Man and then starts to show what she can do, alright? She's trying to give him a run for his money in order to show how rough and tough she really can be. So she shows him her mutant powers, like jumping, hopping, climbing, all like a squirrel. It's amazing. He's fascinated. She's even pumped to show him that she can also sound like a squirrel too, which, I mean, if you can do it, I would love to see that. Fair. But the most impressive of all these abilities has to be when an abundance of squirrels is commanded to jump onto Stark, and then enter Dr. Doom. Doom comes in and he interrupts Stark's electronics. So, in order to save Tony at this point, she needs to send a horde of squirrels onto the Doom ship. Just a horde of squirrels. As if they don't have, wives and kids to go back home. They have nuts to store and eat. They have things to do, right? And voila, Stark is free thanks to the insane squirrel posse. Then the rodents get their fur on Dr. Doom and he's forced to retreat and jump into nearby water. It's the best panel ever. He's like, squirrels? No way, man, I'm out of here. Good riddance, peace. And then he literally runs away and jumps. Like he's out of there. He wants nothing to do with that. One of those times you're happy the hero won, but like, squirrels? We have a lot of squirrels up here in Canada. I don't think they can take on Dr. Doom. They're pretty bad. Number 5, Spider-Man and the Red Goblin. The Red Goblin. It's a mix between the Green Goblin and Carnage. I mean, you have a combination of two of the most powerful bad guys ever against Peter. He shouldn't have won this, I don't think. Let me explain. Appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man 798, this all came to life after Norman Osborn stole the Carnage symbiote, and after that, all hell just broke loose. He created this monster. So Norman used the Carnage symbiote to eject all the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mashup becoming the Red Goblin. It was like a science experiment that made things worse for everyone, but better for him almost. So the rare weaknesses that the symbiote did have went away once the two had merged, making him like unstoppable. Peter Parker for sure should have lost this battle. I mean, he's so overpowered here. I mean, even the bombs that he throws at Spider-Man are upgraded versions of his own bombs. This time around, the bombs are red Carnage bombs that Pete can't even sense. It's all fused together and it's really intimidating. It's very scary. So Pete seems to agree by his choice of words. Peter admits a few pages later after he retreats that he couldn't last 3 minutes in the ring with him. Yeah, I agree. The readers are like, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The final issue had Peter get the upper hand on Osborn by mind games? Yeah, he explains how Carnage will get all the glory here in this defeat of Spider-Man and not Norman Osborn. I mean, ego is a great place to attack. If it works, it works. So when he becomes Norman Osborn again, the fight is manageable now, and Spider-Man can come out on top. Now, as great as this is, I really don't think it would be this easy to turn the tides. Not after seeing Carnage bombs. Get out of here, no way. Number 4. Hulk versus everybody. Okay, this one's pretty wild. So Thor Ragnarok was loosely based off of the Planet Hulk storyline. And I say loosely because in the comics, well, that story didn't end up going so well. See, on Sakaar, the rocket that he arrived in ended up blowing to smithereens, causing some casualties that left him a little heartbroken, to say the least. So he rolls his shoulders back a few times, and then he heads back to Earth, and thus begins the World War Hulk storyline. He just destroys everybody. I mean, all the heroes that Earth loves at this point, just in the path of this death train. Like, he locks the Illuminati in Madison Square Garden, and then he makes them fight to the death. That in itself is brutal. That's crazy. But I mean, I guess if you spend enough time on Sakaar, that just becomes second nature, you know? The whole story is a bloody good mess. I mean, it's great seeing the panic on the Avengers' faces this entire time. It's scary. So make sure if you haven't already to grab all 5 issues of 2007's World War Hulk, because it's a treat. The whole thing's a big battle. Number 3, Spider-Man Close to Home. So when a supervillain escapes, it's not a great time. Usually they're going to come back for the person that put them in there in the first place. So Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful, and of course it's really, really sad. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin, Electro, Sandman, Vulture, and Kraven. They are all waiting for him. They all wanted a piece of the spider, and in the end, they got what they wanted. The entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, basically. So everybody's running to safety and he's limping around. He's doing his absolute best. He's pulling off fire hydrants and using Electro's current to do some damage to other guys. He's giving it everything he's got. And that's the beauty of this one. He's exhausted from the start. He gets shot before this fight even happens. And you feel it while you're reading it. This is a plot that I think we're gonna finally see in the next Spider-Man movie. I mean, hopefully. With all these villains knowing Peter's true identity now, we could get them all literally showing up at his house, bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way with Peter's heroic death. See, Miles actually saw this whole fight take place, so it actually inspired him to take on the mantle of Spider-Man. So these villains may have won this time, but Miles Morales is coming for you. Number 2, Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. This issue was released in August 2012, and it is exactly what it sounds like. So what's the story here? Why does Wade want everybody dead? Well, the X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity. But the doctor wasn't too good at handling a task because the doctor was actually Dr. Psycho Man. So the procedure went well, I'd say. You know, something happened. He brainwashed Wade in hopes to shut down all these inner voices, and well, it worked. Awesome, hooray, there we go. It worked, but the only downside was those voices were now replaced with voices that were encouraging him to kill everybody in the Marvel universe. And this is a must read. From start to finish, it is brutal, it is graphic, it's an easy one on this list. Number 1, Iron Man vs. Captain America. Seeing two of your friends argue is uncomfortable enough, let alone seeing two of your superhero friends try and kill each other. Captain America Civil War is one of my favorite Marvel movies to watch, because when these guys finally battle it out, there's years of history behind it. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed again by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie is politics. It's superhero politics, like in the comic, minus, you know, most things from the comic, like the school blowing up, for instance. Let's leave that part out of this movie. But in the film adaptation, Tony sides with the government and the Sokovia Accords. He feels responsible for the death of Charles Spencer, or rather with the whole Weekend of Ultron stuff. Steve wants to protect Bucky, and freedom throughout the entire team definitely wouldn't hurt either. So eventually, due to Baron Zemo's sneaky little snake work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are just filled with them both trying to end each other. Tony even blasted Bucky's arm off during this fight. He's going for blood. So Cap decides last minute to stick the shield in Tony's suit, and that shield Tony made very clear didn't belong to Cap, and that it belonged to his father. And that's it, the pair don't reunite now until half the universe gets snapped away. So be nice to your friends, guys, don't try and kick their ass with a shield. Kicking off the list at number 10, Spider-Man, Jester, and Jack-O-Lantern. The MCU's Captain America's Civil War is much more tame than the comic book. I mean, for starters, in the comic, Peter sides with Tony until he realizes that Tony is spying on him, so he switches over to Cap's side. That didn't happen in the movie at all. So in the comic, this causes Stark to send out Jester and Jack-O-Lantern to go and fight Spider-Man. So Peter ended up getting his butt kicked to these guys, and it's all thanks to Stark. There's no chance also that Peter should have lost to them. I mean, imagine if he didn't lose, the entire story would be so different. At first, the two thought taking orders from S.H.I.E.L.D. was a bum deal, as they put it, a bum deal. That is until they got the orders to fight Spider-Man, which they made very clear that they enjoyed doing. And before we continue on with this list, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video, it helps the channel out a lot. We really appreciate it. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to our list. Number 9, Batman vs. Guy Gardner. Okay, this one comes from Justice League issue 5, and it's commonly known as the punch. We have a punch and we have a slap. Now it's time to talk about the punch. So in this comic, Batman comes to take over the Justice League International, and Guy Gardner doesn't share the same enthusiasm as the rest of the team. So for more than one issue, he makes it very clear that he doesn't like this new leader. He's not a fan of the Bats. So naturally, a large conflict was growing, although Batman was clearly the better fit for the role. So he challenged Batman to a fight without the use of his power ring. Big mistake. And then Batman proceeded to knock him out with one punch. One punch, one punch. Yes, here we go. Blue Beetle even got pumped about it and started yelling, one punch, one punch. Hence why it's a big thing now. This is an amazing moment, and an even greater lesson rather, but a Green Lantern getting knocked out by a human punch should never happen, ever. Never. Don't start fights you can't win without the ring that makes you a superhero, or else you're just a guy in a suit. Pun intended. Number 8, Bruiser vs. Wolverine. Runaways, issue 12. So we see Logan and Molly Hayes, aka Bruiser, have a rather quick exchange. Now at this time, Wolverine was a member of the New Avengers, and he's trying to get to the bottom of what happened to Dagger. So he, Cap, and Iron Man went to find help from the Runaways, seeing as the signs were leading to Cloak being responsible. So Molly is one of the strongest heroes ever, for sure. But how she handled Wolverine was almost a little bit too easy. So they walk into the cathedral, Cap calmly asks her to stop screaming, and that Wolverine and him are not going to hurt her. Laying the foundation. Good. Said very calm from a very calm man. This is good. The screaming continues, and Wolverine even asks if she's heard of heightened senses, and then gives her 3 seconds to stop drilling a hole into his brain. So he counts 3, 2, and then the next page we have outside face down Logan in the snow. Then when he comes back in, he's quite embarrassed about what just happened, even saying how he won't tell anybody tonight what happened if they don't, as he brushes off some snow. Number 7, Captain America and Sharon Carter. We go back now again to the Civil War comic book event where Captain America was killed by Sharon Carter. Yeah, after Crossbones sniped him, Agent 13, who was also at the time Cap's girlfriend, delivered the final bullet from a much, much closer point. Well, it turns out it wasn't Sharon who was doing the work, really. I mean, the classic brainwashing made this defeat happen. Dr. Faustus, yeah, this causes a whole chain of events. I mean, for starters, Bucky decides at that point that he should go and try and kill Iron Man, blaming him for the death of Steve Rogers. And then Falcon also goes after his own lead. Now, Tony ended up showing Bucky the letter that Cap wrote about how he should be the next Captain America, and Bucky agrees to take the spot only if he can operate solo. No shield, no nothing, I'm not working for you, I'm not punching in, I'm just doing my thing. And to think that all this came to a climax after Steve's girlfriend, of all people, was the one to deliver the fatal blow, is just heartbreaking, and it's something that never should have happened. Number 6. Null versus Thor. Spoilers coming in hot for King in Black by Donny Cates, okay, just so you guys are aware. So during the first battle with Null and his army of symbiotes, Thor was not to be found. The God of Thunder would be a perfect fight considering the weakness of the Horde being electricity and magic. Kinda makes sense. He'd be a pretty reliable chess piece to this violent game, no doubt about it. So when the God of Thunder finally arrived in issue 3 of King in Black, he brought a pretty epic battle with him. So Null had come to Earth with his thousands of symbiote dragons, searching for Eddie Brock's son, Dylan. Searching for you, Dylan, they're coming, man. And when he finally got a hold of Eddie, he stripped him of the symbiote and dropped him from the Empire State Building. Things are looking not so great. And then Thor returns finally in the next issue. So you're a god and a king, Thor asks. Good for you. Now allow me to teach you what those words truly mean. And he does just that. Of course, with the help of Tony riding in on an extremis infected symbiote, it's just another week and a bit and we'll see this epic battle continue with issue 4. But so far, it's up to a crazy, crazy awesome start. Number 5, Spider-Man vs. Morlun. It's all fun and games until somebody gets poked in the eye. Or maybe if you're Spider-Man, it's all fun and games until you get your eye yanked out. Perhaps one of the worst things I can imagine, in the Spider-Man storyline The Other, Evolve or Die, we see Spider-Man go toe-to-toe with Morlun, and he gets his butt kicked. It gets so bad that Spider-Man actually breaks his knuckles while he's trying to fight this dude. That's how intense this battle already is. Things, of course, take a horrible turn for the worse when Morlun decides to grab Spider-Man's left eye and then yank. No, he didn't, Spider-Man says. Oh, yes, he did. I said out loud on the bus in front of people. Dude, he pulled his eyeball out, and then to make us feel even more sick than we already do, Morlun proceeds to eat his eyeball, and he even commented on how delicious it was. But if I could ask one question, do the eye colors matter when it comes to like eyeball flavor? Like I got brown eyes, maybe that's like a maple-y kind of smoky kind of vibe. I don't know, maybe my eyes are pretty yummy. Somebody ask Army Hammer, see what he thinks about eyes. Number 4, Batman and the Hulk. Yep, you heard me. So back in the late 70s, Marvel and DC came together for a handful of crossovers. One of these crossovers featured a battle with the Incredible Hulk and Batman. There have been many conversations about who would win in a fight between Iron Man and Batman. If you're a fan of this page, odds are you've had this talk with your friends, because they're both humans who rely on their brains and brawn to get by, kind of even. Personally, I'd pick Batman to win that fight any day, but the Hulk, no chance. Batman vs. the Hulk, issue 27 of DC Comics Special Series. So we have Batman and the Joker trying to control the Green Giant. And when the Hulk gets his hands on Batman, well, that should have been the end for sure. Even Batman said he felt like his spine was going to snap like a pencil. And believe me, if anybody knows what that feels like, it's definitely Batman. So he gets out of his grasp by a nice double ear smack, and then he finishes him off by using some sleeping gas from his belt, followed by a nice flying kick. Now, it's great to see Batman use his skills to take down the Beast. That's what he's good at. Unfortunately, I don't think any fight between them would ever last long enough to give him the chance to do so, especially if he has him in his hands. He would be dead. Number 3, Iron Man and Magneto. Now, when I say that, your first thought probably is, well, of course, Magneto would win a fight fighting a guy in a metal suit, but this wasn't the case during an X-Men vs. Avengers storyline. If you think this is a no contest, you've never met Tony Stark. So Stark gets buried by Magneto under 200 tons of rubble, because even though Tony's suit at this point was made of carbon nanotubes, the island that he was fighting on was made of metal. So step 2 was for Tony to release a swarm of high-tech magnets to try and throw him off his game a little bit. This of course didn't work. You're giving magnets to Magneto, you know? So Magneto tried reaching out to the cosmos to channel power from other planets, but in doing so, he sensed a disruption in the form of the Phoenix Force. So while he was distracted there, Tony took this as an opening and knocked him out. Now, as fun as this was, and it led to other fun things, it was also highly unlikely that Iron Man will beat Magneto again. If this happened on the big screen, fans would rip it apart, no doubt about it. Number 2, Thor and the Incredible Hulk. Thor Ragnarok is easily one of the best installments in the Infinity Saga. Taika Waititi is returning to the studio to do Thor Love and Thunder, and I can't wait. He's super funny. If you haven't seen What We Do in the Shadows, go watch it out. It's his best work, I'd say. And Jojo Rabbit. He makes good movies. So one of my favorite scenes from the movie is also one that makes fans pretty annoyed. Now this part in the movie had to happen so the plot can move a certain way, and we got to see a cool battle take place in the meantime, but it's also kind of unrealistic. So the Grandmaster's great champion, of course, ends up being Thor's friend from work, Hulk. Now he's been there for a while after Sokovia, so he's not the same green guy as they last saw. Thor spent most of the fight getting it handed to him. He was trying to talk to Bruce, trying to calm him down, give him little arm tickles. It wasn't working out. Until he tapped into his true powers and unleashed a good number of lightning bolts to the face. That ought to do it. So Thor is about to finish off Sakar's champion once and for all until the Grandmaster himself intervened. If only he had replaced that remote for like 2 seconds, this movie would have gone a much different route. Maybe less fun, but probably more honest. And finally, number 1, Old Man Logan and the Hulk. I like the Hulk. He shouldn't really lose anything ever. That's the point I'm getting at. Seeing the Hulk fight Wolverine is something I hope we can see on the big screen in my lifetime. I mean, with all these franchises crossing over soon with WandaVision and stuff, maybe it's sooner than we think, but I doubt it. They have no reason to fight yet. But one of the highlight battles between these two beasts take place in Old Man Logan. Now, at the end of the story, Logan went back to finish off Hulk Gang, right? Of course. So soon after the Hulk comes out, they start fighting, even throwing cows at one another. Real wild stuff. Funny, gory, scary, loud, you name it. And then he turns into the big green guy, and boy, does it get ugly. So Billy Bob comes in the cave later on and sees just a mess. He sees bodies all over the floor, and then he sees Hulk struggling with some digestion problems. Odd. So then Wolverine literally rips his way out of his stomach, and that's what kills the Hulk. The Hulk should have won this fight for sure. If he didn't make the mistake of eating him, he probably could have done it. Or the Hulk should have healed after the whole Wolverine C-section thing, so the fight should have maybe continued. I mean, for the story to end this way, it was a little disappointing.
At number 10, we have Cyclops versus Wolverine. In X-Men Schism number 4, a fight breaks out between these two superheroes because of a complex decision on how to face an onslaught of Sentinels unleashed by the world's powers. And as an enormous, seemingly regenerative Sentinel is approaching the two of them, Cyclops insists on allowing the young X-Men to stay and fight, while Wolverine believes it's wrong to put young ones in harm's way. So it's a battle between should we stay and fight or run and regroup. Well, Wolverine gets outranked by Cyclops, but instead of backing down, he goes to their home base and sets 2,000 pounds of explosives to go off at the press of a button to take out the Sentinel and allow for a distraction as they get away. Cyclops is angered by the subordination and decides to take it out on Wolverine as they start to battle it out. And the Sentinel is coming right towards them just to make everything worse. Maybe not the best time to pick an epic fight, guys, but it is a tough call, and both arguments make sense to me in different ways. I guess this stuff just sometimes happens. Next on our list at number 9 is The Thing versus the Hulk. This is a classic showdown that many of you may already be aware of, where Ben Grimm and Bob Banner go at it in the middle of the city streets. Side note, Stan Lee accidentally referred to the Hulk's alter ego as Bob Banner instead of Bruce for a few months before correcting it. Just some trivia for you. Anyway, the reason why they're fighting is basically that the Hulk is going crazy and smashing everything in sight, trying to reach his goal of finding the Avengers to take them down. When the Hulk easily knocks out the Human Torch and holds on to him like a prize at the county fair, the Thing watches by the sidelines wanting to get involved. Then, after Invisible Woman tries to protect the Human Torch with an invisible force screen, she too is rendered unconscious by the Hulk. So the Thing has to take things into his own hands and fight the Hulk himself. The fight goes on for pages and pages, with buildings being knocked down, buses being torn in half. At one point, the Thing drives a boat. It's crazy. Unfortunately, it ends with the crazed Hulk getting the best of Benjamin Grimm, leaving him exhausted both physically and mentally, clambering back to his feet. Alright, at number 8, we've got Superman versus Shazam. In 1996's Kingdom Come, we witness a fight between these two, initiating at the end of issue 3 and carrying out into issue 4. The reason behind the fight is complicated, but to keep it simple, Shazam has been brainwashed by Lex Luthor, so it's not really him controlling his own actions. But it is a tough thing watching as an aging Superman basically gets beaten up so badly that he almost dies. In this storyline, Superman has the pure intentions of trying to corral a new generation of less than heroic superheroes to help bring peace back to Earth. And with internal resistance on that front, and also these plots by his typical enemies to imprison him, he's really just not ready to defend himself. Not to mention, he's totally caught off guard, and once again, he's older. Luckily, after some serious blows of magical electricity coming from Shazam, Superman is finally able to get through to his alter ego and speak directly to Billy Batson, saving himself, and ultimately a whole lot more from what could have been a game-changing move for Lex Luthor and the others. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of destruction done when Shazam sacrifices himself to detonate an enormous bomb early in the air above the battlefield, saving countless lives. Alright, at number 7, we've got Reed Richards versus Namor. This is a spicy face-off as it's a classic fight of jealousy and competition over a woman's affection. Susan Storm is unconscious in the hospital, and the arrogant and shameless Namor keeps making advances on her right in front of Richard. This escalates to the point where Namor actually makes a move on Susan as she's just barely coming to, and right when Reed enters the room as well. Susan tries to de-escalate the situation, but it's no use due to her injuries and fatigue, so the two heroes go after it. As they rip through the city streets, they throw insults at each other as they tear apart cafes, cars, and the road. It's a pretty fiery battle that Richard seems to know he's at risk of losing due to Namor's sheer strength, but Reed takes the win in the end, exclaiming in a heroic monologue that his anger isn't actually directed at Namor, but at himself for not being a good husband to Susan throughout the years. It's a pretty epic battle with some realistic and possibly relatable motivations, giving it a rightful spot on our list. Coming in at number 6 is Namor again versus Daredevil this time. In this instance, Namor is being arrested as if the human legal system is any match for a superhero, and to represent him, he decides to hire the blind Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. Basically, Namor is angry because he wants a place on land for his people who have only ever lived under the sea. In fact, he actually wants to sue the entire human race for denying them their birthright, as he calls it. Matt, being the pragmatic lawyer that he is, simply acknowledges that there's just no legal precedent for suing the whole human race. This obvious and very astute point throws Namor the Submariner into a rage that he takes to the streets without using the door. And in this moment is actually when Daredevil first wears the red suit that we all know, and it's in preparation for his fight with Namor, where Daredevil is off to protect humanity from an outraged underwater superhero. So this fight between two superheroes is heated by an external issue that forces them to clash. In so many words, Daredevil's sense of duty is clashing against Namor's rage. They take the fight directly to the streets, busting down lampposts, crumbling brick walls, and even taking over a wrecking ball at one point. The fight ends with Namor winning, naturally, claiming that Daredevil had been the most courageous of all his foes, at least, despite having faced off against the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. And that's a pretty good accolade for Daredevil, if I've got to say anything about it. At number 5, we've got Spider-Man versus Wolverine. This face-off has such a crazy build-up that it actually needs its own issue called, you guessed it, Spider-Man versus Wolverine. They fight because Spider-Man finds himself caught up in an ongoing operation that Wolverine had been a part of for a long time before the events of this story. And it's, like I said, it's a long story, but basically this woman named Charlemagne is in such a predicament involving Russian assassins and basically an internal manhunt for her arrest, so she actually asks Wolverine to end it for her, to save her from going to a gulag. Spider-Man notices Logan is about to actually make her wish come true. He swoops in, and this is the last straw for Logan. This fight takes place in a graveyard of all places, leaving the two superheroes in a stalemate, each of them seriously threatening to end each other's life. But luckily the fight is broken up at the exact moment by a chopper with its spotlight on, and as this distraction has both of them gripped, someone creeps up on Spidey, who senses it and delivers a brutal punch. But unfortunately it wasn't Wolverine. Instead it was the woman he'd been trying to save, and the punch kills her. I mean, don't be too hard on yourself, Spidey, it's what she wanted, right? And even Logan acknowledges that she probably planned it that way. Okay, at number 4, it's the battle between Thor and Beta Ray Bill. This battle is pretty epic considering it's the fight that would determine whether or not Beta Ray Bill is worthy of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. He'd already shown his worth by actually being able to pick it up, but that wasn't enough, as Thor fights back against his new contender. The battle rages into a river of lava, leaving both warriors exhausted, lying on an obsidian raft. but they float steadily towards a lava fall, waterfall made of lava, you know what I mean. Beta Ray Bill shows his worth further by saving an unconscious Thor from the deadly plunge. After all is said and done, the two warriors end in a draw, approaching Odin with the results. And instead of taking away Thor's hammer and handing it over to Bill, Odin offers him a brand new weapon called Stormbreaker. So it turns out okay in the end. But this is a battle for the history books, with two of the most powerful superheroes in the whole Marvel Universe facing off for the glory of respect and worthiness. Alright, here we are at number 3 with Captain America versus Iron Man, or just the Civil War storyline. I'm gonna match those two into one because they're basically the same conflict. But Iron Man and Captain America have had a deep bond for quite some time, but there are some times when they have disagreements that turn into physical altercations. One of these fights takes place in the Armor Wars storyline when Tony Stark learns that his own technology has been stolen to create super soldiers. And when Captain America sees a chance to preserve the armor, Iron Man gets a bit physical since he wants the technology to stay exclusively to him. So Iron Man knocks out Cap with an electrical charge and leaves the room. But this altercation doesn't even compare to the fight they have during the Civil War event, which we all know has Iron Man and Captain America pitted against each other in their own factions. When Captain America goes in for a handshake in Civil War issue 3, he leaves an electron scrambler on Tony's hand, which immobilizes his whole suit, leaving him on the ground while the rest of the team faces off. But Tony isn't done, gets up to land a massive blow on Steve, tearing his mask and nearly severing his jawbone. It's sad to see old friends fight like this, but it definitely makes for a pretty exciting read. At number 2, we've got Batman vs Superman. This turn of events is so impactful on the storyline we're used to that it was turned into a movie. These two had a relationship so tight they were like brothers, who sometimes fought. But most of the time these fights would be due to mind control, like in the Hush storyline when Superman is brainwashed by Poison Ivy and sent to attack Batman. But we all know the fight that really puts these two near the top of our list is the one in Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. This storyline, set in the future, depicts an older, more brutal Batman who is wreaking havoc against crime in Gotham. And when the government notices Batman acting out of sorts, they send Superman after him to put a stop to it. And this fight is epic. What really makes it cool is that you'd expect a human Batman to be totally outmatched by the Kryptonian alien Superman, but the matchup is more even than you'd expect. And it ends with the two in what seems like almost a draw. But that's where I'll leave it for the few of you who don't know what happens still. Needless to say, it's a pretty insane face-off, but I think it's fair to say that the world is better off with these heroes on the same side. Okay, finally at number 1, there's Avengers vs X-Men. This showdown has happened before this new event coming out soon, it just didn't involve the Eternals. And of course the context will most likely be different. But in the original Avengers vs X-Men event, the disagreements start with the two factions having opposing views on how to approach dealing with Phoenix Force. On one hand, the X-Men think the Phoenix Force will bring a rebirth to mutant species, a cause they have always felt very passionate about. But the Avengers are concerned that Phoenix Force will basically wipe out all life on Earth. When 5 of the X-Men are possessed by the Force, the battle then becomes more complicated, with this third team now involved. And what's good about this is that the Phoenix 5 then become a common enemy between the remaining X-Men and the Avengers, who start trying to take them out one by one. Eventually, it's just Cyclops with the Phoenix Force in him, and he basically gets turned into full-blown Dark Phoenix, putting an end to the fighting between the Avengers and the X-Men. Because you don't really have time to fight each other when there's a Dark Phoenix with a laser vision flying.
Number 10, Magneto vs Uranos. During an X-Men Red tie-in issue for the AXE Judgment Day event, in a fight that lasted barely a page and a half, Uranos completely destroys Magneto. And I mean destroys him. And never mind Magneto, although that brief battle is something to behold, Uranos completely wrecks most of planet Arakko too. Well, him and his army, but still. While Magneto would later on get some sweet revenge on Uranos, in the first fight the two have, Uranos manages to wrench Magneto's heart from his body, seemingly killing him, which was very shocking at the time. However, we later learn that Magneto manages to stay alive to fight another day by controlling the metal in his blood, controlling its flow throughout his body. So even without a heart, his blood can move and he can stay alive. Also, for those of you claiming that Magneto shouldn't count on this list because he's a villain, I'd say that lately Magneto's actually been pretty heroic, so it's safe to count him here, at least from my perspective. You don't know what I'm talking talking about, then you need to read some comics, because there's some really good X-Men books happening right now. You are missing out, like X-Men Red. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and you are like, oh my gosh, I wish they did this with like anime and manga, guess what? We do! And you can check it out over at Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. Number 9. Aquaman versus the Death Kraken. I mean, this is definitely a one-sided fight, because in the end, Arthur has no chance but to basically give up. Or, well, I guess not give up per se, but to potentially sacrifice himself to defeat the enemy, which makes it sound a lot more balanced than it is, but trust me, it's not that balanced of a fight. The Death Kraken is basically a giant cosmic kraken known as a space kraken. These beings roam the cosmos, devouring parts of, or in some cases, entire worlds. Kinda like Galactus, but more terrifying to behold because, you know, they're krakens. The Death Kraken has an intense hunger for death, and so it wants to actually devour worlds, whereas its twin, the Flood, hungers for oceans. In order to defeat the Death Kraken, Arthur realized that he had no other choice but to enter the Kraken, allowing it to basically consume him whole, as he had the life force within him, the opposite of the death energy that the Death Kraken was sustained by. So he was like, that should cancel the other one out and I should be able to defeat it. Aquaman successfully did defeat the creature, but it is implied that it cost him his life to do so. And I mean, I can't see any other way that would have gone. I mean, look at that thing. The Death Kraken is massive and it's horrifying. It's gigantic. I mean, that feels just like a very uneven fight, just seeing those two beings together. Number 8. Batman versus Wonder Woman. It just goes to show you that although Batman is super skilled, prepared, strong of body, mind, and will, it isn't enough to rival the might that is Wonder Woman. In Wonder Woman, the Hecate, Batman attempts to apprehend a woman wanted for murder, but is blocked from doing so by Wonder Woman, who is tied and bound to that woman, Danielle Wellies, who is called on the right of Hecate. Performing the ritual correctly means that Danielle has Diana's protection, in exchange for her servitude to Diana. However, not only does Batman fail to beat Wonder Woman in combat to get Danielle from her, but he also fails when he tries to also use the same ritual to get Wonder Woman's protection. Yikes! That's a pretty bad defeat right there. He's sort of like, alright, maybe I can do the thing, and she's like, you can't do it. You kinda suck at it, Batman, but so nah. Number 7. Emma Frost versus Professor X. A lot of people think of Professor X as one of the strongest telepaths in the world, and he is, but he's not the only one. And although Emma Frost generally takes second place to the likes of her rival, colleague, and frenemy, Jean Grey, she can actually hold her own against Charles, as it turns out, especially when she's smart enough to bait him into a trap, which, you know, Emma, she's a very smart gal. This so happens when Charles attempts to take control of Cyclops' mind to see if there's anything of Nathaniel Essex, Mr. Sinister, left in there. At least that's what he claims anyways. Emma sets a trap in Scott's mind, with his permission of course, and when Charles attempts to probe further, he basically sets off that trap, unleashing Emma. Emma is then able to take full control, having been biding her time wisely by setting up blocks and fail-safes so that she can basically call the shots and take over Charles's mind, as she attempts to search Xavier's mind for the same thing, any trace of Sinister, and also torment him somewhat while doing so, as Emma says to Charles, at the risk of sounding vulgar, I own you, which, yeah, she kinda did there for a second. Number 6. Gambit versus Wolverine. Although this might not be as satisfying for our editors here at Top 10 Nerd, sorry editors, this one comes to us from the Wolverine podcast series, really in essence a serial radio play, so not a lot of images, but there's lots of images of Wolverine and Gambit that exist, so hey. For this one, I am talking about Wolverine the Lost Trail. By the way, if you haven't listened to either The Long Night or Lost Trail, I highly recommend both. They are both very well cast, produced, and with a great story. And if you ever wanted to picture Richard Armitage as Logan, you can do so here, as it's his voice you're going to be hearing in this role. In the episode Greenhaven is Everywhere, the penultimate episode for this story, Logan frees himself from Jason Wyngarde's control, only to face a still mind-manipulated Gambit. While Gambit attempts to convince Logan with the words that joining Wyngarde's Greenhaven is the right thing for him to do, Logan, of course, refuses to hear it. He's not about the mind control right now, he's not feeling it. As a result, Gambit pulls out his cards and tensions begin to rise. The two actually circle each other, which you can hear reflected in the audio dialogue if you happen to be listening with headphones on. And in the end, when Logan decides the only way out of this is to take out Gambit, Remy goes for his bow staff. He's like, I don't even need my cards, I just need my bow staff. Not true in this case. Logan quickly cuts his staff in half. Gambit then asks Logan if he'll be cut in half next, to which Logan responds, nope, if I can't get through to you with words, pausing to punch him in the face before adding, "Fist to the face should do it." Which it did, so true. Number 5, the Justice League versus Perpetua. Sometimes when it comes to one-sided fights, it's about heroes smacking down other heroes, or heroes smacking down villains. But in this case, it's about a whole team of heroes who got destroyed by a single villain. Though to be fair, this villain is also kind of like woven into the fabric of reality, as it is understood not just in the DC universe, but beyond that, into the DC multiverse, and even kinda beyond that. During the events of Death Metal, Wonder Woman faces off with Perpetua earlier on, and could have stopped her, but when Perpetua first explains the true nature of anti-crisis energy, which Wonder Woman needs to use to defeat Perpetua's crisis energy, Wonder Woman is hesitant to use the anti-crisis. During her hesitancy, Perpetua and Batman Who Laughs destroy reality, rebuilding it with crisis energy in Perpetua's image, unleashing the dark multiverse, with Batman Who Laughs later in turn betraying Perpetua. Justice League loses, with Batman, Wonder Woman, and Supes all being given a new horrible place in this dark world. While this loss is shocking and intense, later Diana does become willing to unleash the anti-crisis energy after understanding the cost of it and deciding that although it's a pretty scary change, it's still better than, you know, Perpetua's and Batman Who Laughs' way. So it's a temporary loss, but still it was quite a dramatic one, and we got a lot of cool alternate versions of characters, so yay! Number 4, the Fallen One versus King Thanos. This fight is literally described as one-sided in the comic it appears in itself. This one comes to us from the alternate reality where Thanos wins in issue number 17 of the 2016 Thanos series. With this arc in the series, Thanos wins, being by Donny Cates. Thank you, Mr. Cates, for giving us Cosmic Ghost Rider in this one. So awesome. Here we see the Fallen One, who is now shiny Onyx, formerly Silver Surfer, deemed worthy enough to wield Mjolnir. He fights against King Thanos, who has killed almost all life in the cosmos. The Fallen One attempts to make him pay and initially has the upper hand, but in the end is beaten back, impaled, and torn asunder before being pulverized. And he also loses his buddy Hulk, so it's really sad. Number 3, Batman versus the Joker. Not just any Joker either. For this point, we are talking about Emperor Joker. This is an extremely powerful version of the Joker who gets 99.99 of Mr. Mixie's Pitilix power after tricking him out of it. Mr. Mixie was going to give Joker 1%, but he got swindled by the jokester because, of course he did. The Joker uses his newfound power to do a bunch of nasty things, but one of which is basically tormenting Batman on a daily basis before killing him each and every day, only to resurrect him the next day, bringing him back so he can do it all over again. The defeat is actually so traumatic for Batman that eventually, when Superman does find a way to beat the Joker, restoring the world to normal, Superman is actually forced to take Batman's memories of the daily torment from his mind. Otherwise, Batman would have been unable to operate as a hero, or really a person, as that entire experience broke him. Also, you know something's bad when it breaks Batman. He's a pretty unbreakable guy normally. Number 2, Green Lantern versus Batman and Robin. What can I say about this one? Well, it comes from Frank Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, so I think you can imagine how it goes. Yeah. All-Star Batman and Robin is an experience, to say the least. In issue number 9, Green Lantern comes by to try and tell Batman he's taking things too far, warning him that he's putting people in danger, and basically imploring him to just stop being such a crazy jerk. Seemingly, Hal's house call is triggered specifically by the fact that he is accusing Batman of kidnapping Dick Grayson, who he does not know but suspects is Batman's new sidekick, Robin. Despite Batman trying to deny this, even though, like, Hal's not dumb Batman. He can put the pieces together. Batman evidently does not want to hear it, and he's been preparing for Hal's arrival, as we can see from the beginning of this issue. He and Robin paint an entire safe house of his yellow so that he can super easily kick Hal's butt in it when he invites him there to, I guess, meet. Yeah, because yellow is the color of fear on the emotional spectrum, and so therefore, it is Hal's weakness. So yeah, defeated with lemonade. I don't know. Number 1, Green Lantern versus Batman. A lot of times Batman gets the final say in these Green Lantern fights. For this point, we are not talking about Hal Jordan though, but instead everyone's favorite Lantern, well, at least some people's favorite Lantern anyways, Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner is a Green Lantern who's been known to get on his teammates' nerves. At times, his cockiness is a little too much for his fellow heroes, which may have been the case when Batman referred to him as a mongrel. But of course, Guy did not take such an insult in stride. In response to this, he challenges Batman to a fight he is sure to lose, unfortunately. Batman accepts the challenge and knocks him out in one punch, which comes back a few different times in the comics. It's a pretty memeable and hilarious moment, to be honest. It's important to keep in mind that Guy, isn't using his ring in this fight, although he didn't get much of a chance to, even if he wanted to do that. As Mr. Miracle says, "I'll say this for Batman, he's efficient." Just one punches Guy Gardner, oh boy. Number 10, Iron Man vs. Squirrel Girl. I love how even during Doreen Green's very first appearance, she earned her title of being unbeatable. The very first time we meet Squirrel Girl, she's attempting to impress Iron Man in the hopes of earning a place at his side as his sidekick. The crazy part is she successfully ambushed him too. During a test flight for his new collision avoidance radar, that's really what he calls it, Doreen jumps onto his flying suit of armor, with him inside. Unable to see except through digital readouts that appear on a visor he's wearing, he is successfully surprised and thrown off course. When Iron Man attempts to remove his visor, Doreen uses her tail to block his vision still. In the end, they both crash to the ground, and Doreen introduces herself as Squirrel Girl, explaining that she simply wanted to prove herself to him in order to earn a place as his pard, short for partner. Sadly, he turns her down, even though she did prove that she's pretty awesome, I think, in that issue. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please head on down, give this video a thumbs up, also to let us know that you want to hear about some more one-sided fights. Number 9, Trinity vs. Harley Quinn. In one of what can only be described as one of the most wild fights ever that seems to be more about clout than powers or ability, Harley Quinn managed to defeat not one, not two, but all three heroes that we consider as belonging to DC's Holy Trinity. We're talking about Batman, Wonder Woman, and of course, Superman. When did this go down? During Heroes in Crisis. And how did Harley do it? By playing on the weaknesses of the heroes she was up against, and also utilizing Batman's utility belt, of course, which in and of itself generally is equipped with items needed to take down Bat's colleagues, because that's just how Batman rolls. It's like, I always got kryptonite on me though, just in case, you never know. Number 8, Jubilee vs. Wolverine. Sometimes heroes get slapped by other heroes. Slapped. Such a great onomatopoeia. In the case of Jubilee, this is what happened when Wolverine came face to face with her. Of course, this wasn't just normal Jubes, this was Jubes under the influence of the Shadow King. She was possessed by him, in fact. Initially, Wolverine baited her in by promising that he wouldn't hurt her. Wolverine says, in fact, "I ain't gonna fight you, Jube. I couldn't." But it turns out that that's a lie. Although he doesn't badly injure Jubilee, knowing she is not in control of herself at this moment, he does knock her out with a slap. A slapped, if you will. Of course, this wasn't a direct fight between the two heroes, as Wolverine was only doing this to protect others from Jubilee, and likely also to protect Jubilee from herself at this moment in time. Number 7, Shazam vs. Superman. Shazam vs. Superman is a fight that everyone is always eager to know about when it comes to who ends up on top, who will win. They're so similar, but so different. Multiple times, the person who has won has actually been Superman though, despite his weakness to magic, specifically Shazam, or as he was once known, Captain Marvel's magic lightning. Despite this, Superman has before used Shazam's own lightning against him though, putting him in the way of it and thereby transforming Shazam back into his kid form of human boy Billy Batson, proving that sometimes it's not necessarily about power, but instead all you need is the right technique or course of action to turn a fight. I think that's personally why I would always feel like Superman would usually win that fight, because I feel like Superman, he's just got the know-how a little bit more than Shazam does. Experience, experience. Number 6, War Thor vs. Mangog. Mangog in general is just completely nuts when it comes to his power levels. There are less that are actually able to stand up against him in comparison to the number that he's decimated at one point or another in the comics. I mean, yeah, only a few people can do that. But one of the heroes who got it the worst was probably War Thor. War Thor ended up being confronted by Mangog and being classified as a god, and he was absolutely decimated by him as a result. Issue number 701 of Mighty Thor showcases a brutal fight between the two when Mangog comes looking for the rest of the Asgardians and only finds War Thor. He even manages to completely destroy War Thor's hammer, which is super sad. Also then, of course, War Thor gets destroyed because no hammer, no War Thor. Number 5, Professor X vs. versus Cyclops. I mean, this fight could easily be very one-sided, possibly going either way depending on who was writing and depending on where these characters were, but this one was really one-sided because it ended in death. Charles's death. Professor X died in the raging fire of Scott Summers' Phoenix. During Avengers vs. X-Men, Cyclops became one of the chosen Phoenix Five, after Iron Man, while attempting to destroy the Phoenix Force, split it into 5 instead. Cyclops becomes the last of the 5 left with the power though, and it becomes too much for him, corrupting him. Professor X, at this time a pretty hated dude, as revelations of all the awful stuff that he'd done in the past had come to light in recent years, attempts to talk his star pupil down. But Cyclops is not gonna hear it. Pissed at Xavier, and rightfully so to be honest, although this may have not been the best timing for him to do this, Psyche refuses to give in to Charles's control and simply straight up kills him in response. As he could do because he has the Phoenix Force. So I mean, I guess Charles was like, I can win this. I got like emotional things I can use. No, didn't work. Phoenix says no. Number 4, Doctor Doom versus Squirrel Girl. In the same issue that Squirrel Girl handily defeated Iron Man, although he remained unimpressed with her, Squirrel Girl also takes on master villain Doctor Doom and once more proves her mettle as an unbeatable superhero. Here it was Squirrel Girl's ability to communicate with squirrels that allowed her to defeat Doom, causing him to abandon his own ship. I kid you not. I also love how Doom, I feel like, still sees this as a victory in his mind. Also, I bet Doom would say this was a Doombot. I don't know if this has been retconned to a Doombot yet, but I could see Doom saying that. Basically, Dorian Green has been an unstoppable force since day one, as Marvel Superheroes number 8 from the 1990s is actually her first appearance, if you can believe that. Number 3, Batman vs. Bane. Probably one of the most famous fights in comic book history. In this fight, Batman is brutalized by Bane. Bane ends up escaping Arkham and decides to see, how much havoc he can cause. When Batman ends up overwhelmed by the hordes of recently escaped criminals swarming the streets, Bane takes this as an opportunity to strike. Run down and exhausted after a night of non-stop fighting at this point, Batman is easily defeated by the villain, who famously breaks Batman's back over his knee, which we have that awesome page of that awesome cover. Ouch. Bruce Wayne's Batman would return from this, but it would take him some time to heal. As you know, does happen if you break your back, which you can heal from. It is possible, but it's not super easy to do. Number 2, Wolverine vs. Punisher. And maybe one of the most controversial of one-sided fights of all time, we see two heroes fight against one another, both who generally use less than heroic methods for getting things done. However, one of them still seems to be called a hero on the regular, that being Wolverine, while the other is often relegated to a different category, that of anti-hero, that being Punisher. It's kind of interesting. The two originally were kind of working toward the same goal here, but when they both differ on the method of how to deal with the situation, Wolverine ends up getting pretty humiliated in the ensuing fight, with Punisher even at one point steamrolling Logan. And that's after he does a whole bunch of other awful things to him, some of which I can't even say. That's how bad they are. Number 1, Joker vs. Superman. Can we even call this one a fight? It's kind of just straight up murder, really. Although maybe rightfully executed murder? I don't know. I don't think murder's ever really right. I guess it also depends on which side of this conflict you feel you're on, though I think by the end of Injustice, pretty much all of us are on Batman's side, right? No? Yes? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But back to the fight at hand. This one obviously went down in the alternate reality of Injustice. Here, Joker and Harley Quinn end up manipulating Superman into killing Lois by making him think he's fighting Doomsday. In doing so, they not only have killed Lois, but also her and Superman's future offspring, and all of Metropolis gets blown up too as well. Unsurprisingly, Superman does not take this very well, and when they get Joker in an interrogation room, Superman ends up cracking under the pressure of Joker's unrelenting grin, killing the Joker in cold blood. Because that's what would probably also happen if the Joker came up against Superman. Well, just saying, if Superman wanted to at any time, he could just pretty much end that.
Number 10, Magneto versus Red Skull. Magneto and the Red Skull are on opposite sides of history. Magneto grew up in a Jewish family living in Germany during World War II, and we all know Red Skull and Hydra's stance in World War II Germany, so it's safe to say that these two villains would almost never get along, right? In Acts of Vengeance from 1989, Magneto and Red Skull were actually temporarily united, but it's really important to note that Magneto was unsure whether this was the Red Skull that that aided Germany in the slaughter of his people. So Magneto confronted him and Red Skull confirmed that he was indeed the original. It didn't take much for Magneto, the master of magnetism, to overpower the Skull, but unlike what you might think, Magneto does not take his life. Instead, Magneto leaves the Skull isolated in a stripped down fallout shelter 20 feet underground. He removed the ladder from the escape hatch, gave him 10 gallons of water, took out his homing transmitters, gave him no food and no light, just water, air, and his own depraved thoughts. Number 9. God King Doom versus Thanos. 2015's Secret Wars has Dr. Doom receiving the power of the Beyonders at the conclusion of Time Runs Out. The Latvian dictator is able to save reality from complete destruction at the hands of the Beyonders, stealing their power and merging all reality into a place called Battleworld, which he rules over as God Emperor. A few characters show up on Battleworld with their full memories intact, and they try to stop Doom and put things back to normal. One of them would be Thanos. Thanos, being the smug mad titan he is, decides to challenge Doom and refuses all of Doom's offers to work with him. So in one quick movement, Doom plunges his hand into Thanos' chest, grabs a hold of his spine, and turns his body to ash, leaving one of the most amazing comic panels ever. Number 8. Joker versus Alexander Luthor Jr. The Joker has a special something that just no other villain can really stand up to. What is it? Popularity. People love the Joker. This magic word, popularity, allows the Joker to beat out other villains that in the real world he would never be able to take down. It also allows him to save the day on occasion. In 2005's Infinite Crisis, Earth 3's Alexander Luthor Jr. attempts to remake the multiverse into one perfect reality. Perfect for him at least. By the end, well, he fails, but he finds himself cornered by Lex Luthor and Joker of New Earth, which is the mainstream continuity. Joker pretty ruthlessly scars Luthor Jr. with acid and then brings his life to a sudden end with a bang. And it was all because Alexander didn't include him in his scheme in the first place. Number 7. Joker versus Simon. Yes, it is the Joker again, and guess what? He will appear later on as well. But I also hear you asking, Adam, who the heck is Simon? Exactly. That's my point. You think that the infamous Joker is going to fall to a guy named Simon, who most people haven't even heard of? Simon is a villain of the Teen Titans who has vast telekinesis and telepathic powers, and he is also the leader of the Fearsome Five. But in Salvation Run number 2, he is a member of the new Injustice League when a bunch of villains get exiled to an alien world. He attempts to convince his fellow supervillains that escape is impossible, and then proceeds to lay down plans for beginning a new civilization, only to be very abruptly interrupted by the Joker, who runs up and smashes Simon's brain in with a rock, repeatedly. Like I said, it was very abrupt. Number 6. General Zod versus Captain Boomerang. Never put a captain up against a general. It will not go well. In 2016's Suicide Squad, in literally the second issue, Task Force X are sent on a mission to Russia to retrieve or destroy an unknown device. Turns out that device is actually a portal to the Phantom Zone. Rather than leave it be, Captain Boomerang approaches the portal and is literally incinerated down to his ankles instantly by none other than General Zod, who was trapped inside only to break free. I doubt the Boomerang guy would have been able to help much in the squad's fight against Zod. Honestly, it's a miracle any of them actually survived at all. Number 5. Venom versus Sandman. In Peter Parker's Spider-Man Volume 1, number 16, Sandman took to reforming the Sinister Six to go after Spider-Man. Now, one of those six was Eddie Brock, aka Venom. Being the villain he once was, Venom betrayed Sandman and the two got into a fight. Things quickly take a turn for the violent and chompy as Brock/Venom takes a huge chunk out of Sandman's body, causing Sandy to destabilize and break down, unable to stop himself from dissipating into a nearby storm drain. It's a pretty awful and pretty quick dispatching. Sandman does eventually return, but not as his old self, as the years spent in a kind of ghostly form left him in kind of tatters. Damn Venom. Number 4. Kite Man versus Riddler's Army. Okay, I am a sucker for an underdog. In Batman Volume 3, there was the war of jokes and riddles between the Joker and the Riddler, surprisingly, each fueled by their desire to take Batman's life. Now, each of these lunatics had gathered up a group of villains to their side, and they caused a hell of a lot of damage to Gotham and its people in their war. One person caught in the crossfire would be Charles Brown. Charles became a mole for Batman in Joker's army, and when Riddler found out, he brought Charles's son to an end. Charles became Kite Man and joined up with the Joker to get revenge. With Batman's help, Riddler takes down Joker's army one by one, one, leaving only Kite Man, who is forced to switch sides. In the final climactic battle though, Kite Man helps Batman and Riddler's army infiltrate the Joker's holdout, and when the battle is won and the villains turn on Batman, Kite Man had a backup plan that allowed him to almost single-handedly incapacitate 8 of the biggest bads on Batman's rogues gallery, helping Batman save the day. Never underestimate Kite Man. Hell yeah. Number 3, Batman Who Laughs versus Perpetua. Remember how I said Joker would be showing up again? Well, I kinda half lied. It's actually a Jokerized Batman, which is taking 2 of the arguably most popular DC hero and villain combos and mashing them together. Who can stand in the way of that? Also, to call this fight one-sided is a little debatable, but the Batman Who Laughs rose from being just a man to becoming a multiversal level threat very quickly after he gained access to the powers of Dr. Manhattan. This level of power allowed him to face and defeat Perpetua, one of, if not the, most powerful god in DC Comics, who is mother of the multiverse. He became the nightmare of one of the most powerful beings in all of DC Comics, sealing her away within fragments of the Source Wall. Number 2, Thanos versus Loki. Taking a break from comic books for a moment here, let's journey to the MCU. Loki is one of those characters who has elevated himself beyond the status of villain into a bit more of an anti-hero role, and the popularity of Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of the character is likely somewhat to blame for that. But popularity is not saving this character. In the opening of Avengers Infinity War, Thanos attacks the remaining Asgardians after the events of Ragnarok. Though they are Asgardians, he does seem to lay waste to them pretty easily. With Loki feigning allegiance to the Mad Titan, he makes a move against Grimace with a dagger only to be stopped, disarmed, and choked to death without the big bad even seeming to break a sweat, truly solidifying just how much of a threat Thanos is going to be. And in at number 1 is Thrag versus Dinosaurus. The Viltrumites from the Invincible comic series are a race of near invulnerable, incredibly strong, world-conquering aliens. But none among them stands as strong, as invulnerable as Grand Regent Thrag. Battle-hardened over thousands of years, only the most powerful characters can even hope to stand one-on-one against this powerhouse. David Anders, the villain known as Dinosaurus, is not one of those characters. While Dinosaurus is very strong, it's more his intelligence that is his greatest weapon. Dinosaurus allied himself with Invincible around issue 90 of the comics, and he would see Thrag attempt to take down Mark. Dinosaurus attacks Thrag, but his claws break on Thrag's skin. Thrag pummels the Dino Man, but he stops, distracted by an explosion, giving Dinosaurus the chance to chomp on his head, only for him to completely shatter his teeth, giving Thrag the chance to mock him and then break his jaw and leave him for dead. Luckily, Dinosaurus uses the opportunity to heal and escape with Mark.
Coming in at number 10, we've got Wolverine versus Wolverine from Marvel's Age of Ultron event. Now, as a mutant that's been cloned once, twice, or even several dozen times, Wolverine is certainly no stranger to having to cross claws with a version of himself. However, the time-traveling shenanigans involved in stopping Ultron's complete takeover of Earth has to be one of the most notable. After making the incredibly difficult decision to travel back in time and kill the creator of Ultron, Hank Pym, Wolverine found out that the new Pymless future he'd created was even worse than the one he'd left, and was immediately attacked by this apocalyptic future's version of Wolverine. Then again, considering the entire reason this version of Earth was now destroyed was partially due to a war with the Skrulls, we can maybe understand why the future Wolverine would be a bit suspicious of any newcomers. At number 9, we have our very first clone of the list with the battle between Thor and his cyborg copy, Ragnarok. During the events of Civil War, the real Thor was presumed dead after saving Asgard from destruction. As a means of reinforcing his side of the conflict, Tony Stark wound up using a strand of Thor's hair to create a half-flesh, half-machine clone of the fallen Avenger. A plan that went horribly off the rails when the cloned Thor, dubbed Ragnarok, killed the superhero Goliath and converted many heroes onto Captain America's side. When the real Thor was eventually resurrected, he wasted little time in completely dominating and destroying his copy, proving once and for all who the true God of Thunder is. Coming in at number 8, we've got another Avenger fighting a less than worthy variant with Captain America versus Hydra Cap. After an alternate Steve Rogers that had grown up as a devout follower of Hydra wound up taking over the entire United States in a particularly controversial Marvel storyline, the world was overjoyed to see the real Steve Rogers return and finally put this imposter in his place. Literally bursting forth out of a shard of the cosmic cube, the true Steve Rogers was able to fight back against this twisted version of everything he stood for and eventually break his armor down with a little help from the worthiness deciding Mjolnir. At number 7, we've got to go with the classic storyline of Hulk versus the Maestro. Bruce Banner often has to face off against different mental versions of the Hulk inside his head, but this alternate version of himself from a post-apocalyptic future is the real deal. Naming himself Maestro after conquering what remains of America following a nuclear winter, this version of the Hulk has become far stronger than the Hulk's usual starting strength, with years of sucking up deadly radiation only improving his ferocity and power. When the real Hulk encountered this warlord version of himself, the only way he was able to finally come out on top was by literally warping the Maestro back in time to be killed by the same gamma bomb that created the Hulk back in the 60s. I'd say that's a little bit of overkill though. Coming in at number 6, we have the Battle of the Batmen with Tim Drake versus Jason Todd. Now, the many Robins of the DC universe are no strangers to occasionally squabbling amongst themselves, but when both Tim Drake and Jason Todd are dressed as Batman and beating the hell out of each other in the middle of the Batcave, well, that's just dramatic enough to earn a spot on this list. During a period of time in which Bruce Wayne is believed to have been killed by Darkseid, Jason Todd had taken over the cowl and cape and become a much deadlier Dark Knight. Not wanting Bruce's no-killing rule to be abandoned, the Bat family tried many ways to get Jason to stand down, before finally culminating in a Batman vs. Batman battle that shook the Bat family to its core. Coming in at number 5, we have Barry Allen versus the future Flash. In a possible future where Barry Allen is distraught at where his life has led and feels like the Speed Force is on the verge of collapsing, this version of Barry begins heading back in time to kill off his rogues gallery and eventually prevent the death of Wally West. This brings him into direct conflict with the main DC timeline's Barry Allen, and eventually the future Flash decides he'll use his past self as a battery to attempt to go even further back in time. Talk about some real self-hatred going on there, Barry. Maybe you should stop messing with the timeline for just a little while. Coming in at number 4, we have Superman versus his 6th-dimensional future self, which just might be the most comic book thing I have ever said out loud. When the entire DC multiverse was at stake due to Lex Luthor and his followers attempting to break the Source Wall and free the Dark Goddess Perpetua, Superman and the Justice League were forced to open a doorway to the mythical 6th dimension, where only the creators of the multiverse could usually exist. After passing through the doorway, Superman seemed to return as an older, wiser, and more enlightened version of himself, a hypothetical perfect Superman. However, this all turned out to be a ruse by Perpetua's son, the World Forger, leading to the real Superman and his futuristic doppelganger to battle it out at the very edge of the universe. Man, what a bummer that this guy's awesome beard turned out to not be real after all. At number 3, we've got the original Clone Saga, the story of Peter Parker versus Ben Reilly. For years, the biggest question in all of Spidey comics was, who is the real Peter Parker? The hero we've been following for years, or this new character originally introduced as Ben Reilly? Also going under the name of the Scarlet Spider, these two characters would go back and forth from friends to enemies and everything in between, with Ben even taking the main Spider-Man label for a while as they struggled with questions of identity and who was behind their complicated lives. That's some clone drama at its very finest. Coming in at number 2, we have Mr. Fantastic versus the Maker. Now, most fights on this list have been between two variants of a character that have only briefly encountered one another, or eventually were able to reconcile their differences. But in the case of the Maker, this is a version of Reed Richards that is just as smart and cunning as his regular heroic self, but using that intellect for his own twisted goals again and again. Not only are these two versions of Reed Richards directly opposed to one another, but their greatest battles have involved the fate of each of their respective universes, with the maker still dead set on finding a way to restore the Ultimate Universe to its former glory. And finally, at number 1, we have Deadpool vs. Evil Deadpool, a matchup that definitely has the weirdest origin story compared to anyone else on this list. Following an encounter with a love-struck stalker superfan, Deadpool searches her house to discover that she's actually been collecting discarded body parts that he'd lost over the years in her freezer. Weirded out by this turn of events, Deadpool dumps all of the parts into a dumpster, not realizing once they thaw that all of the body parts will Frankenstein together because of his healing factor, forming a new, even more hideous Evil Deadpool. With this Deadpool wanting to accomplish evil feats that even the real Deadpool wouldn't consider, it's not long before the two super violent copies are battling it out. Coming in at number 10, we have Supergirl vs. Dark Supergirl. I wonder which of these two is the evil one. During a battle between Lex Luthor and Supergirl while he was wearing one of his infamous war suits, Lex attempted to turn Supergirl into a Kryptonian slave by hitting her with a surprise blast of black kryptonite energy. Instead of corrupting Kara's personality directly, however, it wound up splitting her in two, creating a dark doppelganger that possessed all of Supergirl's powers, but with her memories twisted into believing she was sent to conquer Earth rather than protect it. This dark Supergirl was strong enough to turn on Lex Luthor and fight him to a standstill on Earth's moon, and it was only through the combined might of the real Supergirl and the Justice League that Dark Supergirl was able to be defeated and reunited with the rest of her consciousness. At number 9, we've got to go with Wolverine vs. Laura Kinney, aka X-23. Following many failed attempts to revitalize the Weapon X project that wound up giving the original Wolverine his adamantium skeleton, the project shifted direction to attempt to clone Wolverine directly. Unfortunately, 22 failed attempts later, the scientists involved realized that the Y chromosome in their genetic sample was damaged. Thus, a female clone labeled X-23 was finally successfully born. This clone would have an extremely traumatic childhood as she was molded into the weapon that the project wanted her to be, and would eventually finally battle with the original Wolverine outside of the X Mansion. And while this clone would eventually take up her own name of Laura Kinney, and even take up the Wolverine mantle as a new hero, we'll never forget when Laura and Logan first clashed claws. Coming in at number 8, we've got a mental battle of the Goliaths with the Incredible Hulk versus Devil Hulk. Deep within the recesses of Bruce Banner's mind, a Hulk personality representing all of his hatred and self-loathing is locked away, desperately searching for a way to access the real world, as many other Hulk personalities have done in the past. During an incident in which Bruce and his Savage Hulk and Joe Fixit personalities ventured within his own mind, it took the combined might of all three of them to prevent the Devil Hulk from escaping and becoming an unstoppable monster in the real world. At number 7, we've got Superman vs. Ultraman. Hailing from the Dark Earth 3, where many of the DC Universe's heroes and villains find themselves with completely different moral alignments, Ultraman is a selfish and twisted version of the Man of Steel who leads his world's crime syndicate rather than the Justice League. With kryptonite making him more powerful and his only weakness being the Earth's yellow sun, Ultraman stands for everything that Clark Kent is opposed to, and every time the crime syndicate attempts to invade the mainstream DC universe, you just know there's gonna be a long, drawn-out battle between these twin sons of Krypton. Coming in at number 6, we have the Pink Power Ranger versus the Ranger Slayer. Yes, the Power Ranger comic books have been going on long enough now that they've started to delve into alternate universe crossovers, and one of the most exciting new villains to result from this plot development is the assassin known as the Ranger Slayer. An alternate version of the Pink Ranger Kimberly, the Ranger Slayer was born after the deaths of the Red and Blue Rangers led to this Kimberly's bow being corrupted with dark energy. The second she picked up her weapon, she was corrupted into a new villain known as the Ranger Slayer, a villain that couldn't even be defeated by her normal universe self, but had to be freed from her dark spell by the real Kimberly shattering her corrupted bow. Comic book logic, you really gotta love it. At number 5, we've got Miles Morales versus Miles Morales versus Miles Morales versus Miles Morales? That's right, it's a 4-way battle this time, as just like the original Spider-Man, Miles Morales wound up getting his own clone saga. When a villain known as the Assessor experimented on Miles' spider-modified DNA, he was able to create 3 rapidly aging clones, each with their own quirks and variations on Miles' base powers. Going by the names of Shift, Salim, and Mind Spinner, these 3 clones weren't inherently evil, but were dead set on finding a cure to their rapid clone degeneration, a miscommunication that wound up bringing them into conflict with the real Miles Morales. Coming in at number 4, we've got Beast versus Dark Beast, and unlike the Dark Supergirl entry on this list, this evil doppelganger is unfortunately here to stay. Originally hailing from the alternate timeline known as the Age of Apocalypse, this version of Hank McCoy was a twisted mad scientist working under the tutelage of Mr. Sinister, striving to create the most powerful mutants possible, no matter what the cost. Although this messed up future would be prevented by the X-Men, Dark Beast was wily enough to find a way into the main Marvel universe and avoid his existence being erased. Ever since, he's been a persistent thorn in the X-Men's side, and a particular burden on Beast, who would much rather that someone didn't use his intellect for evil. At number 3, we've got the Battle of the Spider-Clones with Ben Reilly versus Kane. While I already featured Peter Parker and his clone duplicate Ben Reilly during part 1 of this series, Kane is actually the very first Spider-Man clone ever created. Unfortunately, being a prototype means that Kane is mentally unstable and physically scarred, with his cells rapidly degenerating as a side effect of the cloning process. Kane was a major enemy to Ben Reilly for many years, attempting to frame him for murder and manipulating his life for Kane's own benefit. However, both of these clones would eventually find their own destinies as anti-heroes, and giving the Marvel Universe even more web-slingers to worry about. Coming in at number 2, we've got Cable versus X-Man, 2 characters that are kind of the same person, but also kind of not in a weird comic booky way. Also hailing from the Age of Apocalypse timeline, X-Man, also known as Nathaniel Grey, is the son of this dimension's Cyclops and Jean Grey. Cable, meanwhile, is from a different alternate future, and his parents are Cyclops and a clone of Jean Grey. You see, totally not confusing. While Cable's telekinetic abilities are hampered by the techno-organic virus that gives him his unique appearance, X-Man is a full-fledged Omega-level mutant, capable of altering energy and matter at a massive scale. With both of them being extremely powerful in their own ways due to their vastly different upbringings, these 2 heroes cause quite a commotion every time they clash. And finally, at our number 1 spot is one of the biggest comic book battles in recent memory, Batman versus the Batman Who Laughs. With all of the Joker's insanity combined with all of Bruce Wayne's strategic brain and intellect, the Batman Who Laughs is one of the scariest villains the DC Universe has ever seen. Hailing from the dark multiverse, a place where the evilest and most cursed worlds are doomed to die, the Batman Who Laughs invaded the regular DC multiverse with an army of equally twisted Batmen and threatened to destroy all of creation. In fact, the threat posed by the Batman Who Laughs and his Dark Knights was so grave that the real Batman actually had to team up with his own Joker to wind up defeating their DNA digivolved foe.
Number 10, Batman vs. Red Hood. During the story Under the Red Hood, Batman ends up face to face with Red Hood, aka Jason Todd. For years, Jason Todd was thought dead, but at this point it's been revealed that he is in fact alive, and has been for some time. Jason decides to return to Gotham and seek out Batman as the vigilante Red Hood. However, there is a great conflict between the two, with Batman fighting Red Hood during their first encounter and later condemning Jason for his brutal form of justice and his willingness to kill those who stand against him. When Batman attempts to persuade Jason to rejoin him, this has the opposite effect, only turning Jason more towards the darker path. Jason gives Batman an ultimatum: kill the Joker or kill him. You see, Jason wasn't mad that Batman wasn't able to save him years ago, or that he didn't come looking for him after his seeming death. He was mad that the Joker was still alive, with Batman allowing him to go on living, despite what he'd done. Batman refuses, however, to kill Jason or the Joker, instead preventing Jason from shooting the villain. As a result, Jason becomes an enemy of Batman, and a villain in general. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by hitting that subscribe button? Do it, I dare you. Number 9, Guardians of the Globe and Invincible versus Machine Head, Hired Goons, and Battle Beast. This has to be one of the most brutal fights we've seen thus far in the animated series Invincible, though fans of the comics know that this really is just the beginning. Mark Grayson as Invincible hoped to help one of Machine Head's hired goons, Titan, escape his criminal life. However, in the end, he was betrayed by Titan, who only wanted to take his boss's title and position. And Invincible, as well as the Guardians of the Globe, also ended up getting their butts handed to them by Machine Head's hired muscle, Battle Beast, to boot. Which, I mean, fair enough. Battle Beast is nuts. Number 8, the Suicide Squad versus Starro the Conqueror. Because I mean, come on, you know I gotta do it. You know I gotta do it. Starro the Conqueror is one of the most destructive forces we've seen in the DCEU, and also maybe has one of the saddest stories besides in terms of his origins. That's right, for this one we are pivoting over to the DC Extended Universe, the name for their cinematic universe, and James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. Here, Starro the Conqueror is an alien life form that was basically kidnapped from outer space, brought to Earth, and experimented on by the Thinker. Over time, he has grown to be massive and, of course, quite angry at his captors. When the Suicide Squad are tasked with uncovering the secret of Project Starfish and destroying the base that houses it, they end up freeing Starro, causing mass destruction in Corto Maltese. They defeat Starro in the end, but some of them, of course, die along the way, and the amount of property damage and casualties as a result of this fight is pretty immense. Number 7, Wakanda versus Namor the Submariner. This fight targeted the entire, often mostly heroic nation of Wakanda. And what's more, it was another supposed hero, or at least anti-hero, doing the damage. This all went down during the Avengers vs. X-Men event, with the Avengers said to have taken up refuge in Wakanda, and Namor being possessed by a piece of the Phoenix Force belonging at the time to the Phoenix Five. He decided to use his power to draw them out. How did he do this? Well, with a tidal wave that destroyed much of Wakanda, killed or hurt many of its people, and ended up causing a split between everyone's favorite couple, T'Challa's Black Panther and Aurora Monroe's Storm. Thanks for that, Namor. Namor! Number 6, Great Ring of Arakko versus Uranos. This one was pretty brutal for Arakko, and it was a surprisingly quick fight. This all went down during the event Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals Judgment Day, or AXE for short. With the revelation to the world that the mutants were capable of resurrection, new Prime Eternal Druig realized he could use this information to his advantage, and to strengthen his rule. He decided to label the mutants as deviants, seeing their ability to control life and death as excess deviation. Labeling it as such, he went to war with them, and was even convinced to release eternal criminal Uranos. Uranos is known for being one of the most effective warlords around, removing any and all who basically stand in his path, and eradicating them and whatever race they belong to or world they belong to completely. When Druig unleashes Uranos on Mars, now known as Planet Arakko, the ruling government known as the Great Ring does not stand a chance against them. I feel like within the first 5 or 10 minutes of that fight, they're pretty much defeated as well, which is pretty crazy because they're like all Omega level mutants. Number 5, Marvel Universe versus the Progenitor. This one was quite the doozy. Remember how we were talking about AXE? Well, doesn't end with Druig unleashing Uranos. Although Uranos plays a key role and is a massive threat in this story, he isn't even the main antagonist here. That role is actually taken by the Progenitor. The Progenitor is the Rebel Eternals' response to Druig's reign and his attack on mutants. They decide the best way to stop him is to resurrect a Celestial, creating their own version of one of the cosmic gods, and giving it a moral system which would actually help the Celestial to see their side of the argument, thereby defeating and deposing Druig. This, however, does not work out as planned. With the help of the Avengers and mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister, the Eternals create their god, but it turns out that the Progenitor is less interested in judging solely Druig, and more interested in judging all of Earth. And if found lacking, the Progenitor promises that within 24 hours, Earth will be destroyed as a result. And after the 24 hours are up, and it does indeed judge Earth to be unworthy, it begins to deliver on its promise, killing many of Marvel's most prominent and most powerful heroes. Number 4, Superman versus the Joker and Harley Quinn. This one definitely ended in major disaster, as it was the event that ended up resulting in the Injustice timeline here. And we all know how that ended up. awfully. This was a really one-sided fight too, as Superman didn't really stand a chance against the Joker and Harley Quinn's machinations. Which sounds weird to say considering it's Superman, but that's what happened. In this world, they manipulated Superman into thinking that he was fighting Doomsday, when in reality he was actually fighting Lois Lane, you know, his one true love. Discovering only too late what he'd really done, the realization of what they'd made him do basically broke Superman. He would end up killing the Joker in cold blood and turning into a tyrant as a result of this targeted and grossly successful attack on Supes and his family. Number 3. Marvel Universe vs. Onslaught. When Marvel's heroes came up against Onslaught, it took all of them banding together, even joined by some villains, to stand a chance against him. And even then, this seemingly was not enough, with many heroes sacrificing themselves in order to defeat Onslaught for good. At first, we were made to believe that these heroes were dead, gone for good. That's how deadly the threat of Onslaught was. People were willing to lay their lives on the line. Fortunately, that's not exactly what happened, and instead, Franklin Richards, the child of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, and Susan Storm Richards, aka Invisible Woman of the Fantastic Four, was able to save the day. Despite his youth, Franklin at the time had immensely powerful reality warping powers, and used them without really even being super aware of it, kind of subconsciously, to safely stow Earth's heroes away in a pocket dimension. Onslaught would be defeated, the heroes saved, and shortly after they would make their return to the main reality of Earth 616. But still, we thought they were all dead, so it was a pretty big cost, it seemed at the time. Number 2. Captain America vs. Iron Man. When these two fought just as the 2015 Secret Wars event was starting up in Avengers issue number 44 during Time Runs Out, it was literally a fight that ended with the destruction of the multiverse. I don't know how much more disastrous that can get. While Captain America and Iron Man weren't the ones behind the destruction of the multiverse, they also weren't doing much to help prevent it at this point either. This fight had been a long time coming at this point, considering all the pent-up frustration and tension that had been growing between these two over the years, especially after the events of Civil War. The thing is, there will always be room in the comics for a fight between Cap and Tony, because, well, they're both so different in terms of their ideologies. Unless I guess we are in the reality of Earth 3490, where Steve Rogers and a female version of Tony named Natasha Stark are actually married. Although, I'm sure even those two fight, right? Marital fights. Number 1. DC Universe vs. Perpetua. Perpetua is one of the greatest threats the multiverse has ever faced when it comes to DC Comics. And when our famed heroes first faced her, guess what? They lost. I know, it's shocking. That doesn't usually happen in comics. Perpetua's goal was to reshape the multiverse in her own darker image. After she broke free from the Source Wall, she set out to do just this, with the help of her allies Batman Who Laughs and Barbados. In the end, Perpetua would be defeated, even being betrayed by one of her own, with Batman Who Laughs usurping her and taking her power for himself. But still, the temporary threat of a new world where Perpetua ruled was pretty awful. And for a while, she kinda did win, so yeah. Number 10. Patton Parnell vs. Moreland. This one goes down pretty quickly in the comics, but we also get a lot of time to get attached, or afraid more like, of Patton Parnell before he meets his end, at least. Patton Parnell is an alternate of Spider-Man, but he couldn't be introduced at a worse time in the comics, in terms of his own self-preservation. He is introduced at a time when Moreland and the Inheritors are running rampant across the multiverse, killing spider totems. As such, just when Parnell's story seems to be reaching its horrifying conclusion, with him becoming a spider-human monster hybrid and chasing after the girl of his dreams who he seems to now be inclined to possibly murder horribly, Moreland shows up. And he does what he does best, kill this spider totem, making Patton Parnell's story very short-lived. Which is good for his neighbor Sarah Jane in the moment, but unfortunate for us readers, as he was a super creepy villainous Spider-Man alternate, and personally, I loved him. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please click that subscribe. Do it, do it, do it! Number 9. Joker vs. Red Skull. Oddly enough, despite being from two very different worlds, these two fought one another in the comic Batman and Captain America, a joint comic venture from both Marvel and DC, written by and with inks by John Byrne. While Batman and Captain America teamed up in the comics, also swapping sidekicks, so do their enemies, the Joker and Red Skull. However, when the Joker learns of Red Skull's bizarre patriotism and ideology, he swears to fight against him. On learning of the Skull's allegiance and Red Skull's offer for Joker to join him and his people, Joker responds by stating, "I may be a criminal lunatic, but I'm an American criminal lunatic." Despite his strong stance against the Red Skull and what he represents, however, Joker is pretty easily defeated here in this fight, being knocked out by one of Skull's goons before being dragged onto the plane to be taken back to Germany. Of course, they never do make it there, and Joker gets the last laugh in the end. Well, really the heroes get the last laugh in the end, but like many fights involving the standard Joker, this one against Red Skull Skull is fairly one-sided. Number 8. Green Goblin vs. Sin Eater. I think the really cool thing about this fight is that in defeating Norman Osborn, Sin Eater also freed him. For Sin Eater, defeating a villain usually has to do with absolving them of their sin, which was exactly what happened here when Sin Eater finally caught up to Norman Osborn. Taking his gun, he fired and shot Norman directly, thereby removing his sin from him. Norman begged and pleaded to not be absolved because he claimed he wanted to beat his own demons by himself, but it turns out that this was likely not really Norman talking but the Green Goblin, who probably was just pleading to try and maintain his sense of evil. Number 7. Mephisto vs. Khonshu. While Mephisto doesn't end up as being permanently defeated, Khonshu, with his avatar Moon Knight, still manages to kill a hefty number of Mephistos. It turns out there are a bunch of different alternates, so Mephisto is able to just kinda like keep coming, but Khonshu, with stolen powers of the Avengers and the help of Moon Knight, ends up defeating 100 Mephistos in one day, which is wild. That's a lot of Mephistos. One is honestly a lot. And if you're wondering why Khonshu is being considered a villain here, it's because during this story arc, Age of Khonshu, he was actually kind of revealed to be one, acting in the name of justice but really taking over the world himself and then turning it into kind of like his own Egyptian underworld in the name of defeating Mephisto. Number 6. Dr. Doom vs. Morgan Le Fay. Doom is often one who believes he is more powerful than all, and in most cases, he's usually right, possessing a brilliant mind and extremely powerful will, and also being skilled in the use of magic. However, even with being a former student of Morgan Le Fay's, even his magic prowess is no match for her own. When Morgan learns that in the future her student and lover Victor will betray her, she decides to strike first. She travels through time to kill him, and although he attempts to stand against her, she very nearly succeeds in defeating him for good. But even though the Dark Avengers do come to stop her, the initial battle here is quick and painful for Doom before he ends up being rescued. Number 5. Killer Croc vs. Bane. Back in Batman issue 489, two heroes known for their strength and sometimes monstrous nature fought one another. And while they may have seemed more evenly matched on paper, one of them made quick work of the other. We are talking about the fight between Bane and Killer Croc, which happened in the pages of Batman back in the 1990s. While initially Killer Croc seems confident in this fight, things quickly turn south after Bane breaks his arm. From there, Bane continues to basically kick his butt and leaves him knocked out and bleeding amongst a pile of toys in the Eden Park Mall. The crazy thing was that Bane and Croc didn't even really fight because they had beef, but more because Bane wanted to face Batman. However, Bane leaves after discovering that the Batman he's come across here is not the true Batman, but Jean-Paul Valley. Number 4. Ishmael Gregor vs. Black Adam. This one comes to us from the recent DC film released exclusively in theaters, Black Adam. The initial fight between these two characters is a fast and brutal one, thanks to Black Adam's rage. In this world, Black Adam is more pitched as an anti-hero, but in the comics, he has been known as a straight-up villain before. Although right now, I would say in the comics, he's also more of an anti-hero, so kinda makes sense. Still, even in the DCEU, this is a guy who has god-tier powers and who just straight up kills people who get in his way. In the case of Ishmael Gregor, he is the descendant of Black Adam's oldest enemy, the King of Kahndaq, who once oppressed his own people in search of greatness. When Ishmael seems to be trying to follow in his ancestors' footsteps and also kidnaps the son of Adriana Tomaz, Amon, both of whom are Teth Adam's allies, Black Adam loses it, emitting a powerful blast of electric energy that defeats Ishmael instantly. While this defeat is swift, it turns out that it's not permanent, however, as this may have been part of Ishmael's plan all along. This one comes from a super random place, but is a pretty intense fight between what are likely the two main baddies of the MCU thus far. In the comics Avengers Mech Strike issue number 4, Thanos is brought into this fight to face Kang, who the entire Avengers are basically up against. Unfortunately, despite Thanos' strength and brilliance, even he cannot defeat the Master of Time. All it takes is for Kang to lay his hands on Thanos and force him to experience the power Kang holds over time itself. He ages Thanos rapidly with his touch to the point that Thanos is no more than a skull, which is a creative way to kill him considering that Thanos was boasting of taking Kang's skull for his own trophy following their fight. Hahaha. Kang doesn't even plan to keep Thanos' skull either, tossing it on the ground and saying he doesn't need souvenirs to keep warm memories in his heart. It's kind of a weird thing to say when you kill someone, warm memories, but you know. The Avengers beat him back after this, but it's an impressive show of strength from Kang. Number 2. Joker vs. Poison Ivy. One of the most brutal fights in comics comes unsurprisingly from the world of Injustice, though more specifically we're talking about Injustice Year 0 issue number 8. Here Poison Ivy pays the Joker a visit to get revenge for the years of mistreatment towards his then ex, Harley Quinn. Ivy is inspired to do this after Harley reveals that she secretly secretly had his daughter, and Ivy warns the Joker that if he ever hurts Harley again, she'll kill him. Despite the Joker threatening Ivy throughout this fight, it's very clear who has the real power between the two of them here. Number 1. Geist vs. Magneto. Geist vs. Magneto has to be one of my favorite all-time short-lived and brutal villain versus villain fights. Though really, between them, it's pretty apparent that Geist is the real villain here, I think. Magneto ends up doing his best to catch Geist and runs into him after he escapes punishment in Terra Verde in the late 80s Wolverine series. Magneto lures Geist out with a little mechanical toy and makes short work of him. While his fate isn't explicitly shown on panel, considering that Geist is a cyborg and Magneto is the master of magnetism, we can imagine how brutal this fight would be, and based on what we do see of what happens to the decoy robot toy, I think we know what's gonna happen there. Number 10. Taskmaster vs. Hyperion. This one is wild, especially when you consider the beating that Taskmaster was allowing himself to take just to get this fight done. And yet he did manage to get it done, and impressively so. We get to learn about how he actually had this one in the bag through flashbacks we are shown during the fight, where it's revealed that Taskmaster's preparation was the key. Now it might seem weird that I'm considering Taskmaster to be the hero in this case, but based on what we learn about Phil Coulson's Squadron Supreme in the 2021 Heroes Reborn event, and that whole thing with Mephisto, it really does make sense based on that. In the Taskmaster series in issue number 2, Taskmaster is working with Nick Fury to clear his name, but Tony Masters has to do something for Fury first. He needs to collect the kinesic signatures of 3 important individuals, one of whom is Phil Coulson. But to get to him, he has to go through Hyperion. And in order to do that, he has to first bring Hyperion's guard down, in essence allowing Hyperion to punch his way through Taskmaster. Ouch. Taskmaster, through feigning a loss though, is able to get Hyperion to drop his guard enough to get a single, powerful boomerang arrow shot out. A Hawkeye classic that is tipped with Hyperion's one weakness based on Fury's intel: radioactive Argonite, which is basically like Hyperion's like kryptonite, so yeah. Alright friends, before we move on to this next spot on our list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? I know there's a lot of you out there that aren't subscribed. I'm looking at you. You're not subscribed. Go click it. Do it. I'm gonna wait. Okay, thank you. Number 9. Dream vs. Karanzan. One of my favorite fights I've ever read in any book, comic, or otherwise happens in the Sandman series, where many of my favorite things happen in comics because it's one of my favorite stories of all time. If you've watched my videos on Nerd Here regularly over the years, you may also know that this comic is one of my favorite stories of all time because anytime I can talk about it, I love to talk about it. The original comic, of course, from the 90s is what we're talking about here, and the fight that happens in it happens during the first arc in the series when Dream is tasked with reclaiming his symbols of office, namely here his helm, which it turns out is currently in the possession of a demon in hell. In order to get back his helm in the comics, he must do battle with and beat the demon currently in possession of it, one of Beelzebub's, a demon named Karanzan. This battle is described as being the oldest game and is in essence a battle of imagination. One can lose through hesitation, inability to take up a solid defensive stance, and of course, lack of imagination. In the Sandman live action series, this is the battle we see that takes place instead between Lucifer and Dream. However, in the comics, it is Karanzan that conjures up the anti-life in the hopes of finally beating Dream. While initially Dream is badly beaten by Karanzan's move, he ends up winning in the end, proving himself really the ruler of imagination, as what else are dreams really, by conjuring up the concept of hope, which obviously can be pretty much everything. Some people might not consider Lord Morpheus a superhero, but I would consider his tale overall to be one similar to that of a heroic epic. And for that reason, and his capacity to do great good when he so chooses, I'm gonna include him here. Number 8. Moon Knight vs. Raoul Bushman. So many of the most brutal fights in comics I feel like come from the time period that this comic does, the early 2000s. One of the most edgy times other than the 90s. In Moon Knight issue number 2 from the 2006 volume, Moon Knight takes on and brutally defeats Raoul Bushman. But even before we get to the brutal yet victorious literal face-off moment, stakes are established here, with Moon Knight being pushed off of a rooftop and falling to his doom, or seemingly falling to his doom, smashing his knees as he goes, and therefore unable to get up to defend himself really when Bushman comes down to finish the job. Fortunately, Moon Knight has his crest fluorescent moon darts, and uses these to bring Bushman down to his level so he can crawl over to him and finish the job. Number 7. Black Panther vs. Namor. Probably one of the most brutal fights I've ever seen on screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe comes to us from the recent Black Panther sequel, Wakanda Forever. That's right, we're going to the MCU, baby! In this film, it is T'Challa's sister Shuri who takes up the mantle of Black Panther after her brother passes away, which was changed in the script after the real-world death of Chadwick Boseman, who initially played Black Panther, Prince turned King T'Challa in the first film and in the MCU. Shuri here takes up the mantle as a last resort to reconnect with the family she has lost, but also because she knows it is the only way she will be able to fight against the newly introduced and complex antagonist in this movie, Namor, the Submariner, or Namor if you prefer. I love the way that it's said in this movie, Namor. When the two do come to blows after Shuri does successfully recreate the heart-shaped herb and becomes Black Panther, Shuri also uses her smarts to take advantage of Namor's weaknesses, creating a device to dry him out, which she places in one of her ships and activates during the fight against the famed Talokan. During the fight, the airship crash lands on a desert-looking beach. It looks real crispy down there, I gotta say. And the two continue their bloody fight, both almost dying as Shuri attempts to prevent Namor from getting back into the water. Through the course of their fight, Black Panther rips off one of Namor's ankle wings, which allows him to fly, and Namor at one point skewers her with a part of the wreckage. Or a spear, I'm not really sure what it is. Looks like a spear, but he also kind of grabbed it from where like the wreckage was. Maybe there were spears on the ship, who knows. Number 6. Batman vs. Reverse Flash. This fight was heart-wrenching for so many reasons, and pretty much perfectly encapsulates the kind of fights I'm excited to highlight here on this list, let me tell you. In Batman issue number 21 from the 2016 comic, part of the Button story, Batman is forced to fight against an enemy who pretty much completely outranks him, the Reverse Flash. We see him get brutally attacked, and while it seems like there is no way Batman can win here, we later learn that being the smart man that he is, Batman himself knew that, and so he'd kind of already won, simply by accepting the fact that if he fought directly, he would lose, and knowing that his best bet would actually be basically to stall until the Flash returned, which ended up being a successful and life-saving strategy actually. Although I mean, in the end the Flash was still a little late, but it worked out, so yeah, and it was brutal, so it ranks. Number 5. Harley Quinn vs. the Joker. While some still might think of Harley Quinn as a villain, this all happened, I would say, around the time of her turning point from kind of villain into hero. This is kind of when it's all going down. And while the road has been long, I would say at this point in time, at the time of this recording right now, despite only a few years before being declared Villain of the Year, that Harley is more hero than villain right now in her history. So yeah. This fight happened, however, quite a while ago now, but Harley was still enjoying acting somewhat heroically, at least, as part of the Suicide Squad, and coming into her own really as a character, or continuing to come into her own, I would say. In Suicide Squad issue number 15, she faces off with the Joker in one of the most brutal fights I have ever read. And while the Joker technically kind of wins this fight, Harley wins the battle, managing to escape with her life after he locks her up and threatens to leave her there to starve to death with all the corpses of the supposed Harleys who came before her. There is so much about this fight that I cannot talk about in detail because we're on YouTube, but just trust me, it's just because it's also literally that brutal. So if you want to read a brutal fight, check it out. Number 4. Spider-Man vs. Green Goblin. This one ended in seeming death for both parties, and it doesn't get more brutal than that. Add in the fact that Peter Parker was also unmasked during the fight and had his loved ones and neighborhood watching him get basically beaten into oblivion, and it creates a pretty intense picture in your mind and in your heart. Or, well, yeah, I mean, you don't even really need to create a picture of it in your mind because this comes from the Ultimate Comics, and of course, they provide the pictures for you because it's a comic book. And what a brutal picture they do paint. This fight isn't just brutal in a physical sense, although it is also that, with Peter smashing a hulking Green Goblin with basically a semi-truck at one point, but it's also brutal in the emotional sense, because it ends with Peter's apparent death. And I mean also Goblin's apparent death. But of course, I'm much less broken up about Green Goblin dying here. No one cares. Norman, you deserved it. In fact, I kind of feel relieved at that part. While this wouldn't be the end for either character, this battle is still one that stands out to me as one with heightened stakes, where the characters feel right on the precipice of death almost throughout, until they actually and tragically cross over to the other side. Number 3. Batman vs. Superman. An iconic fight in the comics that made its way to the big screen. Granted, on the big screen, I
I don't know how iconic this fight was for me, but at the end of the day, the fact that it even made it there just goes to show the impact it had on readers. This fight doesn't even come from the main continuity, hailing instead from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns continuity of Earth 31. But it was so brutal and impactful that it was still incorporated into the main continuity, or the likely, I guess, to be former main continuity of the DCEU. Here, two heroes fight against one another, and one of them doesn't even have any powers to speak of. Batman at this point is not only still powerless, but is also, or I guess was also, retired. He returns from retirement, however, and as a result, Superman is basically tasked with taking him out by the President. But Batman isn't prepared to go down without a fight, and a bloody, brutal, and desperate battle ensues between the two at the end of the story that we later find out Batman seemingly won in his own sly Batman way. While Batman seemingly dies and is unable to finish the fight, with the strain being too much on his heart and him collapsing, we later learn at the funeral that he is still alive and well, and that Clark may have even been in on this ploy. At the very least, he seems to be in on it by the end of the story. Number 2. Hawkeye versus the Liberators. As you'd expect, this list wouldn't be much without me diving into the world of the Ultimates. And what a perfect time for it too, as the Ultimate line is due to make its return in comics this year. There's so many brutal fights in the Ultimates, with Jonathan Hickman heading the return of the Ultimates line. Like many, I too am excited about this, so I thought why not dive back into some of the most brutal Ultimates fights we've ever witnessed. This one comes to us from before Jonathan Hickman's time working on the line, but was delivered to us by the dynamic and often brutal duo of Mark Miller and Brian Hitch. And Brian Hitch will be returning, so fun facts. It does fit right in on this list because it's just that brutal. The fight happened after Hawkeye of the Ultimates team was kidnapped by the Liberators. After learning of what happened to his family and being mocked, tormented, and questioned, Hawkeye finally manages to strike back against his captors with the only weapon he has at the time, his fingernails. And we're not talking about Clint clawing his way out of this. Oh no, we're talking about him using his fingernails as projectiles when combined with his deadly accuracy, which basically allow him to take out an entire group of Liberators and successfully escape. He kills people with his fingernails. Number 1. Mera versus Aquaman. Mera and Aquaman are often presented as being romantic partners, and sometimes as a crime-fighting Atlantean duo as well. However, this doesn't mean that they never fight. And during the Blackest Night, they actually had some pretty good reason to. At that time, Aquaman had been possessed by the Black Lanterns, joining their forces, and Mera was driven into a rage by the death of the last standing family member she had, Tempest, causing her to become a Red Lantern. During one page in Green Lantern issue number 50 from the 2005 volume of that series, Mera takes on the deceased Arthur Curry, and when he attempts to win her over through what I can only describe as weird kind of empathy, I imagine trying to distract her from her rage by attempting to bond with her over the loss of their son. This, however, fails to work, and Mera frightens him off masterfully, responding, "I never wanted children," before seemingly killing them both with her blood, which as a Red Lantern was transformed at the time into liquid napalm, because that's how it be for Red Lanterns. Number 10. Invincible versus Conquest. Goodness. Invincible has a slew of fights that are extremely brutal and brilliant. I mean, their brutality is a huge part of what makes them so brilliant. This is a series that knows and understands the importance of creating stakes, both physical and emotional ones, for its characters. While I considered talking about the fight between Mark and his dad Omni-Man on the first part of this list, or honestly any of the other amazing fights that happen in Invincible to be honest, as I said there are so many, I would like to specifically thank Vaughn Soso for suggesting this one. This is the fight that happens between Conquest and Invincible. When Conquest first arrives on Earth and demands that Invincible take responsibility as the Viltrumite liaison stationed there to basically get the planet ready for conquering. Mark at this point has just gone through hell and back and basically blames himself for all of the terrible things that have happened on Earth recently. So he's not really in a great mood and is filled with anger, resentment, and sadness for all that he's lost, and decides to take on Conquest. Overall, honestly, not a great move, which Mark learns once he finds out just how powerful Conquest is. Probably one of the toughest enemies he's ever faced at this point, which is kind of par for the course for Invincible, because I feel like every time Mark faces someone, he's like, well, I've done a lot of things, and then he's always like, dang, how is this person even more powerful? How is that possible? Honestly, it's saying something, because at this point in the story, Mark has faced like a lot of tough opponents, including a whole army made up of evil versions of himself. The fight gets even more brutal when Adam Eve comes in to help, having literally flown up off a hospital bed where she was currently healing herself to do so. And I know what you all are thinking, wow, Amanda, what a number 10 spot. This is a crazy fight. But yeah, that's all part of the drawing you in, because we got a lot more crazy fights coming up, even though this one might actually be one of our craziest. But wait for that number 1 spot, that one's wild. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us by clicking that like button. Number 9, Deadpool versus Black Box and Black Tom. I still can't believe how close Deadpool came to dying in this fight. And the real crazy part is it wasn't even the villains really who put him in that situation. They were more like the catalysts for him putting himself in danger as he fought against them both. This one comes to us from Daniel Way's run on Deadpool, which happened back in 2008. Here at one point Deadpool becomes cured of his mutation. With his healing factor gone, he is turned back into handsome Wade Wilson, but at the same time a big target is of course placed on his head when those he has royally pissed off in the past basically realize he's now very killable. Two people who end up coming for him are the villains Black Box and Black Tom, and to fight their fire, Deadpool decides to use some of his own fire, using literal fire, using a lighter and basically gasoline to create his own flamethrower. However, while he wins the fight, or while he survives the fight at least, I mean, I would call it a win for Deadpool here, he ends up pretty badly injured after setting himself on fire during it. He gets a little too excited with that sort of gas station flamethrower he made, and also you shouldn't do that at a gas station, as we learned in that comic. Number 8, Superboy Prime versus The Darkest Knight. This one is brutal in a way that pulls at my heartstrings. This fight happens in the comic Dark Knight's Death Metal: The Secret Origins. While the fight itself is pretty short, the emotional and character building implications for it are powerful. The emotional stakes here are high. Superboy Prime ends up facing off against the Darkest Knight in the hopes of defeating him and helping to basically save the multiverse. Now, while he doesn't completely succeed here, he does help turn the tides for his fellow heroes, and this story provides a great redemption arc for Superboy Prime, who was once a hero, basically turned into a massive villain, all because he suffered the heartache of losing his world. While facing off against the Darkest Knight, Superboy Prime is basically offered to be spared and even join up with the Knight's own army of Supermen. He sees a vision of a life he could have in the future where he is once more a hero, fighting alongside his other heroic colleagues if he decides to, join up with the Darkest Knight, who can give him that reality. However, he acknowledges that this would still not be the world he lost, noting that both his parents and Lori would still be absent here. Tempted, Superboy is grounded in reality suddenly by the reappearance of Crypto, and ends up refusing the offer, fighting against the Darkest Knight and giving his life in doing so. While the battle is not finished yet, this is a crucial moment where the tides turn for our heroes, weakening the darkness and allowing the heroes to basically rise up and end up winning the day. It is then confirmed that Superboy Prime did indeed die as a result of fighting back. However, he either gets his world back through his journey into the afterlife, or possibly through the multiverse's reconstruction following the resolution of Death Metal. So he's either dead and then he's brought back, or he's dead and he's in the afterlife and he just kind of gets a little happy ending in the afterlife. Number 7, Dazzler versus Techmaster. One of the most brutal things you can do to a character, we all know, is not to just throw them brutally across a room into a wall, but literally throw them so forcefully that it looks like they were simply drawn sideways in a fight. Like someone took that figure and rotated it, which is what happens in this comic. And I was like, wow, that's bad. Look at Dazzler go, she's literally like this. That's what happened to Dazzler when she faced off against Techmaster. Well, Techmaster is very much, I would say, a lesser known villain, having only appeared in about a handful of issues during his time in the comics. This fight still personally had me on the edge of my seat. Honestly, a lot of classic stories have me on the edge of my seat. I just feel like the suspense just feels so heightened. While Dazzler usually pulls out all her bells and whistles in a fight, in this one she has her special portable radio made by Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four, destroyed, and ultimately it comes down to basically kind of like fisticuffs, as Dazzler fights desperately for survival here. She does win and even almost causes the death of her opponent as he tumbles backwards and falls over a railing. However, her manager, Harry Osgood, manages to rush in at the last minute and save the villain from certain doom, and with his life saved, Techmaster basically decides to make peace with both his rival Harry and with Harry's talent, Alison Blair. So, all kind of works out in the end. Number 6. Thor vs. Kull Borson. Also known as the Serpent and the God of Fear, Kull Borson is actually Thor's uncle, but that didn't stop these two from fighting one another. In fact, their fight was in essence destined to happen. It had to happen, and Thor was fated to die in this battle against his uncle. Odin had attempted to keep Thor safe from this prophecy by locking Kull away years ago. Kull was once actually the rightful ruler of Asgard, the Allfather, but Odin was forced to overthrow his brother after Kull became obsessed with striking fear into both the hearts of his enemies and even kind of his allies. Odin locked Kull away deep beneath the sea, hoping to keep him from ever becoming powerful enough to rise again after he learned that the serpent was prophesied to kill his son. However, even doing this cannot prevent the prophecy from coming to pass. Eventually, Kull would rise up, powered by the fears of the people of Midgard, and choose his own champions, awarding them great power and each their own hammer. Thor would learn the truth of his uncle and with the Avengers do battle against him and his army, dying as predicted in the fight against his uncle, but fortunately defeating him too. However, this is also comics, so both Kull and Thor would eventually return despite their epic showdown and its seemingly permanent results. Number 5. Punisher vs. Wolverine. I mean, these two are both superheroes, which is maybe what makes the fight so much more brutal. This one happened during Garth Ennis's and Derek Robertson's time on Punisher. Here, Punisher and Wolverine end up in a kind of a reluctant team up, or a team up gone wrong, I would say, when Wolverine questions Punisher's methods here. As a result, to prevent Wolverine from hunting him down, or at least to kind of like slow Wolverine down because, you know, he's pretty unkillable, Punisher resorts to all kinds of brutal tactics, including shooting Wolverine point blank in the face with a shotgun, allowing him to have his limbs basically sawed off, attacking him below the belt, and steamrolling him. Literally, he got steamrolled. He got a steamroller and he ran Wolverine over. Boy. Wolverine of course survives all this mistreatment, but it's still a brutal read, and it's brutal in like a lot of ways to me. Definitely a brutal fight. Number 4. Batman vs. the Joker. During the events of Endgame, no, not the Marvel Endgame, the comic story from Batman Endgame, Joker and Batman essentially end up trying to straight up murder one another, or at least from a reader standpoint, that's basically what it seems like. Well, Joker at this point boasts of a healing factor that he claims he received hundreds of years before due to him being like basically this ancient being, far more ancient than Batman could have ever imagined. It's revealed through the course of their fight that, you know, this is probably not true, as Batman ends up successfully nullifying Joker's abilities in a way that reveals he only recently probably stumbled upon these powers and is definitely not as old as he claims and is just trying to mess with Batman, which honestly is the Joker way. Number 3. Conan vs. Kulan Gath. Just when you think Conan is going to take this one, the script gets flipped on you. This fight comes to us from Savage Avengers issue number 25, so good. Here, Kulan Gath faces off against Conan, who has come back to battle this fiend with the help of Kang. So you would think with the impressive arsenal Kang has at his fingertips that Conan would have this, right? Well, this is Kulan Gath, probably at his most powerful. He is the ruler of the world here, and even though Conan manages to maim him, he's not able to defeat him in hand-to-sorcery combat in this issue. Though of course there is a greater plan at work here, which ends up balancing the scales in Conan's favor in the end, but during this issue we don't really get to see that. Instead we focus on this bloody and gruesome battle fought with magic, energy weapons, armor, swords, symbiotes, and sharp fingernails. Deadly sharp, if I may add. Number 2. Superman vs. Doomsday. Superman and Doomsday have an iconic fight that many of us know from the famous story Death of Superman. Now, if you've already watched my part 1 to this list, then this fight actually might remind you of another one I talked about over there. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, be sure to do that after you finish this video, because we have even more brutal superhero fights waiting for you over there. And if you have already watched it, you can guess below which fight I'm referring to as to which one is kind of similar to this Superman vs. Doomsday fight. In this fight, Superman gives up his life to basically defeat Doomsday. This works with Doomsday perishing alongside Superman, ushering in the mourning period that would follow for Earth's greatest hero. But while there were those who could not believe what they were reading at the time that this story came out, this shocking moment at least would not end up being quite so frighteningly permanent, with Clark Kent later being resurrected. Even when you go back and read this, it's very powerful, it's very emotional. Number 1. Miracle Man vs. Kid Miracle Man. Whew! This is a brutal one. Thanks to Michael Lavender for suggesting this one in the comments. I honestly do not think of Miracle Man often enough in my day-to-day. When I'm talking about comics, the Miracle Man is something that exists sort of near the back of my mind. So thank you so much for suggesting this one, because now I get to talk about Miracle Man, which is just a great time. Talk about a character and a story and a fight. Rather, this one is honestly more of a her by the end. Less of a fight, more of just a brutal match. It's true that this is probably one of the most brutal superhero fights in all of comics history, I would say. And I'm actually like sad that I didn't include this on my part 1, but you know what? It doesn't have to be the most brutal, it just had to be some brutal fights. So it's still good. And now we can come back to it over here and I can give it a top spot. We're going back to issue number 15 of Miracle Man to talk about this one from the 80s, although it was also reprinted in 2014, so if you see it looking a little bit more modern here, it might just be because we used that art in this video instead, which is actually also from Toddleben, so it's same artist, just they also redid it. And I would still say that I think this story has some of the most captivating and gruesome artwork I've ever seen in a comic, courtesy of Toddleben himself. In this tragic tale, Miracle Man is forced to fight against his former sidekick, Kid Miracle Man, who is now all grown up. Well, at least his Kid Miracle Man form is. Having lived in this form for years, he aged and also became insane. After transforming back into his human form of Johnny Bates initially, after years of being Kid Miracle Man, who was now an adult and was basically crazed with power, he was traumatized to learn of all the horrible things that he had done in that form. So he was put into an orphanage with the hopes that, you know, being around other kids his age might help him to like drown out the voice of Kid Miracle Man that still plagued his mind and was kind of living in there. However, after being tormented by the other kids and suffering from SA, Johnny ended up saying the magical name of Miracle Man, transforming back into Kid Miracle Man and unleashing him on the world. Thousands, like 40,000 people were killed in the massacre that ensued after this transformation, and in the end, Miracle Man got lucky when Kid Miracle Man was forced to say the magical word once more to escape the pain of the injuries he'd suffered in battle. Also, this battle, I should admit, took like pretty much everyone to even just get him to turn back, so that's wild. Knowing that there was likely no way to save Johnny from his evil alter ego, and therefore no way to prevent this kind of awful massacre from happening again, potentially in the future, Miracle Man was then forced to offer Johnny a sense of comfort, holding Johnny's head before he like basically crushes it in his hand. I have trauma just from reliving the story and rereading it.
In at 10, Iron Man vs. Mr. Sensitive. Oh boy, was 2004 an interesting year, specifically because of X-Statix number 24 from August of 2004. At a very young age, Guy Smith noticed his mutant powers. His skin would easily get irritated, and he always was in tremendous pain. Guy was raised in foster care after his parents died in a mysterious fire, and he underwent extensive martial arts training and mental disciplines to try to block out the pain that he felt. Professor X was able to provide Guy with a special sensory dampening suit, which didn't do anyone much good here, because in the context of this story, Tony and Mr. Sensitive are about to fight at what is aptly named the Church of Naked Truth, which was a church used by a cult of nudists. However, since they didn't want to offend the monks and they wanted to respect their religion, they each stripped down before the fight, laying all their cards out on the table, dare I say. Yeah, Tony throws grass at Mr. Sensitive, and that's not even a joke. He throws grass at him to hurt him because he's not wearing his suit. It's weird, dude. Why was this a thing? In at 9, Doom Above All. Doom Supreme's story history closely paralleled his mainstream counterpart's journey until a pivotal moment where he ascended to the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme, and then thusly conquered his own reality. Indulging in sadistic torment of his foes for countless years, Doom Supreme eventually wearied off his cruel game and ventured into the past with the intent to exterminate the prehistoric Avengers. Upon concluding the hunt, Doom Supreme struck a deal with Mephisto, restoring the Watcher's eye to the orb as a favor, and then satisfied, he departed to unleash his wrath upon other Earths, leaving destruction in his wake. Unbeknownst to many, Doom Supreme had clandestinely gathered and subjugated various iterations of Dr. Doom from these prehistoric Earths. Utilizing Doom the Living Planet as his formidable base, he amassed a huge army of Dooms. Poised to execute his grand design, the stage was set for an epic clash where the fate of countless realities hung in the balance. It was literally an army of Dooms. And then Doom Supreme ruthlessly carved his path towards godlike supremacy. So yeah, if you want to read that, have fun with that. God damn, that was interesting. And at 8, Squirrel Girl vs. Galactus. Okay, I mean, when there's a whole series called The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, you're gonna kind of think that she's gonna end up on this list, okay? Because god damn. Look, I know you love her, but come on. The solo series of the same name debuted in January of 2015 and ran for 8 issues and was relaunched in October of 2015 as part of Marvel's all-new, all-different branding and was published through November 2019, with 50 issues in that section, making for a total of 58. Both series were written by Ryan North, but in issue number 4 of Volume 1, Squirrel Girl literally stops Galactus from coming after Earth by being friends with him. I mean, come on. You're literally unable to sit there and tell me that this shouldn't be on the list. Bro, she didn't even have to fight him, for God's sakes. That's insane. She just talked the Devourer of Worlds into not devouring a world. Come on. Plus, like I said, I know you all love Squirrel Girl, okay? I might not have been here for a while. Okay, I came back, but like, I know that much. I also know that suggesting or saying anything against the Hulk will get me mean DMs for 3 years straight, but hey, okay, at least you love Squirrel Girl. But still, her fighting Galactus is pretty ridiculous. You have to admit, okay? It's pretty freaking nuts. Yes, I made the pun. In its 7 composite Superman, introduced in World's Finest Comics number 142 from June of 1964, Joseph Meek was a former high diver who had fallen on difficult times. If not for Superman's timely intervention, Meek would have perished. So grateful for the rescue, he was offered a job by Superman at the Superman Museum, where he worked as a custodian. However, his bitterness lingered, extended by the constant reminder of Superman's achievements surrounding him. So one fateful night, while Meek was cleaning near statuettes depicting the Legion of Superheroes, a lightning bolt struck that display, somehow imbuing Meek with the combined powers of the Legionnaires. Adopting the name Composite Superman, Meek threatened to expose the hero's secret identities, which he had learned through use of his telepathic powers, unless he actually was accepted into the League. Though Superman and Batman initially struggled against Meek's overwhelming powers, they soon discover his true goal, which was world domination. While unable to defeat Meek outright, the heroes persisted, eventually realizing that his combined powers were only temporary. With this revelation, they managed to overcome Composite Superman, thwarting his bid to take over the world. But come on, fighting a person that is half you, half your friend is the weirdest thing that I think you could ever experience. Okay, if you think of something weirder, let me know. In its 6, Spider-Man vs. Kingpin. Spider-Man was in a weird place during the Civil War arc in Marvel Comics. After revealing his identity to the public, he was at odds with Tony Stark over the Superhuman Registration Act, which made Peter Parker a wanted man. On the run, Peter, Aunt May, and Mary Jane had hid in a rundown motel while he was a fugitive. However, when Kingpin hired a hitman on Spider-Man, it resulted in Aunt May accidentally being shot, leaving her critically injured. Peter would give her a blood transfusion, and while she was in a coma, he went after Wilson Fisk. Peter confronted the mob boss in prison and gave him a fate worse than death. He defeated him in front of everyone. Peter beat Kingpin to a pulp, but refused to kill him at that moment because he realized that the supervillain living with everyone knowing he can be beaten was better than ending his life. But he also mentioned that if Aunt May did die from being shot, he would come back and fill his lungs with webbing and watch him suffocate, which is incredibly dark, but also makes sense, okay? I get where he's coming from. I'm surprised he didn't say something like he would pull his face off by just like not stopping the stick of his hands against his bald head, but hey, that's just my thinking. I'm more brutal. Watching him suffocate probably feels better anyway. But like, yeah, that's messed up. Come on. I'm gonna fill your lungs with webbing. God! Venom? Halfway through in number 5, Kryptonite Chewing Gum. Yes, this is actually a thing. The Justice Buster Batsuit is a mech suit that's part of Batman's Fenrir contingency that's designed to take down the entirety of the Justice League, making its feature appearance in Batman Endgame when the Joker used his virus to warp the brains of the Justice League at the beginning of his Endgame plot. Batman was forced to use the Fenrir protocol to take out his teammates. The suit was successful in eliminating Wonder Woman, Flash, and Aquaman, but met an even match at the hands of Superman. After a lengthy fight, Superman tore through the armor and nearly killed Batman until Bruce used kryptonite chewing gum to spit in Clark's face, rendering him unconscious. Come on, okay? Imagine waking up to learn that you passed out because Batman spit on your face. Like seriously, bro, please, like brush your tongue when you're brushing your teeth, okay? Your breath is absolutely lethal. Not to mention that he had a miniaturized utilized red suns for Knuckles. He also had ancient Greek supernatural weaponry, super fast servers, and electromagnetic nerve trees for a sensor array, but like still, kryptonite chewing gum, that's the one thing that I don't think anyone would actually believe, but it did happen. Not kidding, it happened. In it 4 versus their universe. The brothers stand as cosmic beings representing the DC and Marvel universes, symbolizing the vast multiverses that they embody. These entities possess such immense power that even the Living Tribunal and Spectre pale in comparison. While referred to as brothers, they transcend traditional family, okay? They're just cosmic beings. During the dawn of existence, the brothers encompassed the entirety of everything except for each other. This lack of individuality became intolerable, igniting a fierce conflict between the two. Their battle unleashed forces that brought about the end of creation itself, followed by a grand rebirth. In this cataclysmic cycle of renewal, the brothers were torn asunder and their existence scattered throughout the newborn universe, splintering it into a multiverse. Fragments of their existence are dispersed in all directions as the expanding universes unfolded, and through the process they lost their consciousness and sense of identity, requiring eons to recollect themselves. Literally, it's like me after I'm social for like a day. I have to recollect for eons. But yeah, they were villains in the DC and Marvel Amalgam Universe storyline. Spider-Man was literally fighting his universe, which is pretty ridiculous. So I think it deserves to be on the list. Getting close to the end, in number 3, Batman vs. Hulk. Talk about one-sided fights, right? Okay, like Batman standing up to Superman is one thing, they share a universe, yeah, you can have kryptonite chewing gum, whatever. But Batman and the Hulk have actually gone toe-to-toe. Surprisingly, Batman achieved the seemingly impossible feat of defeating the Hulk in the harmonious days of 1981, when DC and Marvel were on friendly terms and the concept of separate universes hadn't really emerged. They occasionally collaborated on crossover stories. One such amusing tale unfolded in DC Special Series number 27, written by Len Wein and illustrated by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. In this extraordinary encounter, Batman unexpectedly crossed paths with a rampaging Hulk. Manipulated by the Joker to view Batman as an adversary, the Hulk turned his fury towards the Caped Crusader. Batman, recognizing the immense power of his opponent, a giant green monster, he somehow still skillfully evaded Hulk's thunderous blows with every move that he could muster. And then, with calculated precision, Batman deployed a pellet of knockout gas, which was kind of disorienting the Hulk. But since he wouldn't actually, deal with it because he wasn't breathing, Batman swiftly kicked him in the stomach, okay, which ensured his victory because the Hulk had to inhale the gas. Yeah, that's right. Batman kicked the Hulk in the gut so bad, it actually made him flinch. How the actual f*** does that make any sense? Please. Someone explain it to me. Penultimately, in number 2, Juggernaut Bullet. In the pages of Sins of Sinister number 1, jumps us forward a few years to see how the Marvel Universe has changed, sort of similar to how Endgame jumps 5 years into the MCU future. In a complex web of manipulation, Mr. Sinister orchestrates a grand scheme to frame the X-Men as Earth's greatest heroes, targeting anti-mutant organizations like Orkies and implicating the Avengers. Among his concerns is the formidable Thanos, who Sinister plans to neutralize with a secret weapon, a physically controlled juggernaut. It's a freaking juggernaut bullet, okay? And a pivotal moment showcases a small yet powerful juggernaut propelled through Thanos' skull via a temporal cannon crafted by Forge. The impact scatters fragments of Juggernaut's brain matter across 2 billion years of history, but the story doesn't end there. No. In Nightcrawler's number 3, set in a new timeline created by Sinister's machinations, it is revealed that most of the spirits of vengeance have departed Earth, forming their own hive of malevolence, but Banshee, bonded to a spirit of vengeance, explains to Mother Soul that they have infiltrated the mighty Galactus, driven by his insatiable hunger for revenge against those who tainted reality. Unexpectedly though, the same Juggernaut bullet that struck Thanos and altered history now targets Galactic Ghost Rider. Over the course of 1,000 years, Juggernaut hurls through space, gaining momentum, and blows right through Galactus' entire being, and blows up a vault. It's nuts. And finally, in number 1, Archie vs. Punisher. The Punisher is truly a man who never backs down and punishes those that he must, or thinks that he must, okay? and we even see this bizarrely enough reflected in his interaction with the comic of Archie Andrews. Punisher is willing to venture into all kinds of different worlds in order to apprehend a criminal, but he succeeds this time after mistaking Archie for a criminal. But that of course is too easy when you consider how, you know, Archie's a dude. Punisher is committed to catching the evildoer and resorts to food fight tactics. Yes. And for Frank Castle, who often prefers lethal means, you bet that's a commitment. That's absolutely ridiculous. Punisher got into a food fight with Archie. That's it. Just end the video there. Like, what the hell? What the f? A food fight.